You've been taught that trust means knowing the outcome, knowing the direction, knowing that everything will work out. But if that were true, why does certainty still feel heavy? Why does having a plan not calm your heart? Why do you still hesitate, standing still, waiting for one more sign? The truth is this: trust is walking without needing the full map. Buddhist teachings have always pointed here. Life is not meant to be solved before it is lived. Peace does not arrive after control. It appears when you move forward without demanding guarantees. Trust is not about seeing the whole path. It is about taking the next step, even when the road fades ahead, even when your mind asks for proof, even when fear whispers, "Not yet." As you listen, your grip begins to loosen. The pressure to understand everything softens, your breath deepens, your body remembers how to move before the mind agrees. You are not given answers, you are given steadiness. This is not blind faith, this is lived trust, the kind that grows through motion, not certainty. You don't need the full map, you only need the courage for one step. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something shifts when the words stop echoing and the silence settles in. The idea lingers, not as a concept, but as a quiet tension in your chest. You feel it in the pause between breaths, in the moment before the next step. The map is gone now. What remains is you, standing where you are, unfinished, uncertain, and still here. And that is where trust actually begins. Most people believe they must become whole before they move forward. They think clarity comes first, action second. They tell themselves they need to heal completely, understand who they are, define their purpose, and remove every doubt before life can truly begin. This belief sounds responsible, it sounds wise, but underneath it hides a subtle fear. The fear of moving while still becoming. The fear of being seen as incomplete. The fear that if you walk forward now, something essential about you is still missing. Buddhist teachings gently turn this idea upside down. They do not see incompleteness as a problem to solve. They see it as the natural state of being alive. Nothing living is finished. A tree does not wait to grow until it knows how tall it will be. A river does not demand certainty about the ocean before it flows. Growth happens by moving, not by resolving everything first. Trust, in this sense, is the willingness to be unfinished and still take the next step. It is allowing yourself to walk without a final identity, without a clear label, without a fully healed past. This kind of trust asks you to stop treating your current state as a temporary failure and start seeing it as a valid place to stand. Many people delay their lives because they think they are not ready yet, not confident enough, not healed enough, not wise enough, not strong enough. They keep waiting for a future version of themselves to arrive, someone calmer, clearer, more complete. But that version never appears because it is created through movement, not waiting. You do not become ready and then live. You live and readiness grows quietly alongside you. Buddhism teaches that the self is not a fixed object that needs to be completed. It is a process, a flow, something that changes moment by moment. When you understand this, the pressure to figure yourself out begins to loosen. You no longer need to know exactly who you are to take the next step. You only need to be honest about where you are right now. Being unfinished does not mean being broken. It means being open. It means there is still space for learning, adjusting, and becoming. In fact, the belief that you must finish yourself before you move forward often comes from perfectionism, not wisdom. It is the mind trying to protect you from discomfort by demanding certainty. Trust challenges that instinct. It says, move anyway, speak even if your voice shakes, choose even if doubt is still present, begin even if the ending is unclear. This is not recklessness, it is a deep respect for life as it is, not as you wish it to be. There is a quiet relief that comes when you stop trying to resolve your entire identity. You realize you do not need a final story about who you are. You do not need to define your purpose in one sentence. Purpose unfolds through engagement, through responding to what is in front of you, not through abstract planning. When you trust this, you stop forcing meaning and start noticing it. Healing works the same way. Many people believe they must heal completely before they can love, create, or contribute. But healing is not a finish line. It is something that deepens through living. Often, it is through relationships, challenges, and even mistakes that healing actually happens. Waiting to be healed before you live keeps the wound untouched. Movement brings circulation. Stillness keeps pain frozen. Trusting yourself while unfinished also means letting go of the need for approval. When you do not know exactly who you are yet, you may feel tempted to borrow certainty from others. You look for validation, labels, or roles that make you feel solid. But this often pulls you away from your own experience. Trust invites you back into it. It teaches you to stay close to what feels true in your body, even when it does not make sense yet. The body understands before the mind does. You may not be able to explain why a step feels right, but something in you relaxes when you take it. Buddhism honors this kind of knowing. It does not demand that wisdom arrive fully formed. It allows wisdom to arrive late, after the action, after the experience, after the mistake. Being unfinished also means allowing contradictions to exist within you. You can feel brave and afraid at the same time. You can want change and resist it. You can trust the path and still feel lost. None of this disqualifies you from moving forward. Trust is not the absence of inner conflict. It is the decision to not let conflict paralyze you. When you accept that you are unfinished, you stop treating uncertainty as an emergency. You stop rushing to close every open question. You learn to carry not knowing with more ease. This creates a different relationship with anxiety. Instead of fighting it, you acknowledge it and continue walking. Anxiety loses its power when it is no longer the gatekeeper of your life. There is also humility in being unfinished. You stop pretending to have all the answers. You become more receptive, more curious, more patient. You listen better. You learn faster. You no longer need to protect an image of being complete. This makes connection more real. People feel safer around someone who is not trying to appear perfect. Trusting yourself in an unfinished state also changes how you relate to failure. When you believe you must be complete before you act, every mistake feels like proof that you were not ready. But when you accept incompleteness as part of the process, mistakes become information. They teach without shaming. They guide without defining you. Buddhist practice often emphasizes beginner's mind. This is the attitude of someone who does not assume they already know. It is the opposite of being finished. A beginner's mind is open, flexible, and alive. When you trust from this place, you allow life to teach you directly instead of trying to control the lesson. You begin to see that clarity is not something you wait for. It is something that sharpens through movement. Like walking in fog, each step reveals only a little more of the path, but that is enough. Demanding full visibility before moving is not caution. It is avoidance dressed as wisdom. Trust as willingness to be unfinished also frees you from comparing your timeline to others. When you believe there is a correct pace for becoming, you constantly feel behind. But when you accept that growth unfolds differently for everyone, comparison loses its grip. You honor your own rhythm. You stop rushing yourself toward milestones that do not actually belong to you. This kind of trust is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not feel dramatic. Often it feels ordinary. It looks like showing up even when you are unsure. It looks like continuing a conversation even when you do not have the perfect words. It looks like staying with a question instead of forcing an answer. Over time, something surprising happens. The parts of you that felt unfinished begin to integrate naturally, not because you forced them to, but because you gave them space to evolve. Identity becomes less rigid and more functional. Purpose becomes less grand and more sincere. Healing becomes less about fixing and more about allowing. You also begin to trust life itself a little more. Not because you believe it will always be kind, but because you see that you can respond to whatever arises. You do not need to be finished to be capable. You do not need certainty to be steady. You do not need a complete map to take one honest step. This is where trust becomes embodied, not intellectual. It lives in how you stand, how you breathe, how you choose. It is the willingness to stay engaged with life while still unfolding. To say yes to the present moment without demanding that it explain itself first. And as this understanding settles, you realize something important. You were never meant to arrive fully formed. You are meant to keep walking. The walking does not stop once you accept that you are unfinished. In fact, something else appears almost immediately. A quiet fear that rises right after the step is taken. The fear that you might step wrong, that you might choose poorly, that one decision could expose you, undo you, or prove that you never deserved trust in the first place. This is where many people freeze again, not because they doubt the path, but because they fear the cost of misstepping. Most of us were taught that mistakes say something about our worth, that choosing wrongly means being wrong, that failure is not just an event, but a verdict. So even when we start walking, we walk stiffly, carefully, afraid to lean our weight into the step, afraid that if we fall, we will deserve the pain that follows. Buddhist trust moves differently. It does not promise that you will always choose correctly. It offers something more radical. Permission to misstep without turning the mistake into a personal crime. Permission to be human without self-punishment. Permission to learn without self-attack. This permission is not casual. It is deeply disciplined. It requires courage because it goes against one of the strongest habits of the human mind, the habit of judging itself harshly in order to feel safe. We punish ourselves because we believe it will keep us from failing again. But Buddhism sees clearly that this strategy does not create wisdom, it creates fear. In Buddhist psychology, an action is not judged by whether it fits a perfect outcome, but by whether it was performed with awareness. A mistake made with sincerity and attention is not a moral failure. It is part of the learning process. The problem is not choosing wrongly. The problem is clinging to the identity of someone who is wrong. When you punish yourself for a mistake, you freeze growth. The mind collapses inward. Energy that could be used to adjust, learn, or repair is consumed by shame. Shame does not teach, it only silences. Trust, on the other hand, keeps the channel open. It allows you to stay present with what happened without running away or attacking yourself. There is a deep misunderstanding that letting go of self-punishment means lowering standards or avoiding responsibility. Buddhism does not teach that. It teaches accountability without cruelty. You acknowledge the impact of your actions clearly, but you do not add unnecessary suffering by making the mistake define who you are. This distinction matters. When a child is learning to walk, they fall constantly. If each fall were met with blame or ridicule, the child would stop trying. Growth depends on safety, not comfort, but safety. The safety of knowing that falling does not end belonging. Most adults never received this safety. Instead, they internalized a harsh voice that steps in immediately after any misstep. This voice says things like, "You should have known better. What is wrong with you? You always mess things up." Over time, this voice becomes automatic. You do not even question it. You assume it is discipline. Buddhism calls it ignorance, not as an insult, but as a description. It is a misunderstanding of how learning actually works. Trust includes the courage to let that voice speak without obeying it. You hear the accusation, but you do not bow to it. You stay with the facts of the situation. You see what happened. You feel the discomfort. And you ask a different question, not what is wrong with me, but what is needed now. This shift changes everything. Mistakes stop being threats and start becoming teachers, not in a romantic way. Some lessons hurt. Some consequences are real. Trust does not erase pain. It removes the extra layer of suffering that comes from self-rejection. In Buddhism, suffering is often described as pain multiplied by resistance. A mistake creates pain. Self-punishment adds resistance. Trust allows pain to pass through without turning it into a lifelong wound. This also changes how you relate to fear. Many people fear making the wrong choice more than they fear staying stuck. They remain in familiar dissatisfaction because it feels safer than risking regret. But regret is not what destroys people. Self-attack does. The belief that one wrong step invalidates you is what keeps lives small. When you trust yourself to misstep without punishment, movement becomes possible again. You stop demanding perfect certainty before acting. You understand that wisdom is refined through correction, not avoidance. You take responsibility without collapsing. Buddhist practice often emphasizes compassion, but not just toward others. Self-compassion is not indulgence, it is accuracy. It recognizes that a nervous system under attack cannot learn. A mind flooded with shame cannot see clearly. Compassion steadies the system so insight can arise. This does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means separating behavior from identity. You can say this action caused harm without saying, "I am a failure." One statement leads to repair. The other leads to withdrawal. When people punish themselves, they often become defensive or numb. They avoid looking at what happened because it hurts too much. Trust allows you to stay present long enough to understand the deeper pattern. You begin to see why you chose what you chose. What fear was operating? What belief was driving you? This understanding is the ground of change. Another subtle effect of self-punishment is that it narrows your future choices. You become cautious, not out of wisdom, but out of fear of yourself. You stop trusting your own judgment because you believe you are dangerous or incompetent. Buddhist trust restores confidence, not by claiming you are always right, but by proving that you can recover. Recovery is the real skill. Anyone can succeed when conditions are perfect. Trust grows when you learn that you can respond to imperfection without abandoning yourself, that you can make repairs, that you can apologize, that you can change direction without self-hatred. This is especially important in relationships. Many people avoid honesty because they fear saying the wrong thing. They stay silent, then resentful, or they speak harshly, then drown in guilt. Trust teaches a middle way. You speak with care, knowing you may still miss the mark, but trusting your ability to listen, adjust, and reconnect. Buddhist teachings often speak of right effort, not perfect effort. Right effort means showing up with sincerity, not forcing flawless performance. It means staying engaged, even after you stumble. This is the courage to misstep. Not recklessness, but resilience. You also begin to see that many mistakes are only mistakes in hindsight. At the moment of choice, you acted with the information and capacity you had. Condemning your past self with your present awareness is unfair. Trust honors the reality of limitation without turning it into condemnation. Over time, this approach rewires how you experience guilt. Guilt becomes a signal, not a sentence. It points to values that matter to you. It invites alignment, not punishment. Once the message is received, guilt has done its job. Keeping it longer only hardens the heart. There is also freedom in knowing that choosing wrongly does not exile you from the path. There is no permanent deviation, no step that disqualifies you from returning to awareness. Buddhism does not operate on a system of spiritual points. There is always a next breath, always a next moment to begin again. This understanding reduces anxiety at its root. Anxiety thrives on the belief that one mistake will ruin everything. Trust dissolves this belief quietly. You see that life is not a fragile structure that collapses with one error. It is flexible, adaptive, forgiving in ways the human mind often is not. As self-punishment loosens, something else grows. Curiosity. You start asking different questions, not how do I avoid being wrong, but what is this teaching me? Not how do I protect my image, but how do I stay honest? This curiosity keeps you alive and engaged. Eventually you notice that courage feels different now. It is no longer dramatic, it is calm. It is the willingness to act without guarantees and to respond without cruelty when things go sideways. This is mature trust, quiet, grounded, stable. You do not need to be fearless. Fear will still arise. But fear no longer controls you through threats of self-destruction. You know that even if you fall, you will not turn against yourself. That knowledge alone makes the next step lighter. And so, the walking continues, not because you are certain of the terrain, but because you trust your ability to meet whatever arises without self-betrayal. You move forward knowing that missteps are not the opposite of the path. They are part of how the path teaches you to walk. After learning to walk while unfinished, and after discovering that missteps do not require punishment, another tension quietly appears. You begin to notice a space that feels uncomfortable and strangely personal. You act with care, you choose with sincerity, you do your best. And yet, life responds in ways you did not expect. The result does not match the intention. This gap is where trust is tested most deeply. There is a silent belief many people carry without realizing it. The belief that good intentions should lead to good outcomes. That wisdom should be rewarded with success. That effort should be met with results. When this does not happen, confusion arises, doubt creeps in. You start questioning your judgment, your values, even your worth. The mind whispers that maybe you were wrong after all. Buddhist teachings look directly at this gap and refuse to close it with false comfort. They do not promise that wise action will always produce pleasant outcomes. They offer something more grounding. The understanding that wisdom lives in the intention and the presence, not in the result. Outcomes are shaped by countless conditions beyond your control. To tie your trust to them is to place your peace in unstable hands. When you base your sense of trust on results, anxiety becomes inevitable. You are constantly scanning the future for proof that you chose correctly. You replay decisions, searching for signs of validation. You fear that a disappointing outcome means you failed in some deeper way. This kind of faith is fragile. It depends on circumstances behaving well. Trusting the gap means releasing this dependence. It means allowing the space between what you intended and what actually happened to exist without rushing to judge it. This does not mean indifference. It means maturity. You recognize that intention is the only part you truly own. Outcome is a shared event between you and the world. Buddhism teaches that all events arise from conditions. Some conditions you influence, many you do not. Weather, timing, other people's choices, unseen consequences, chance. When you forget this, you take outcomes personally. You believe success proves your wisdom and failure disproves it. This creates a constant emotional swing between pride and shame. Letting go of result-based faith steadies you. You begin to measure your actions differently, not by how they turn out, but by how they were held. Were you attentive? Were you honest? Were you acting from fear or clarity? These questions bring you back to the present moment where trust actually lives. This shift changes how you experience disappointment. Disappointment still hurts, but it does not collapse your identity. You no longer interpret an unwanted outcome as evidence that you should not trust yourself. You see it as part of a larger unfolding that could not be predicted from the start. Many people avoid acting because they fear wasting effort. They fear doing everything right and still losing. But this fear misunderstands the purpose of wise action. The purpose is not to control life. It is to participate in it with integrity. When you understand this, effort is never wasted. It refines you regardless of outcome. Trusting the gap also softens regret. Regret often comes from believing that a different choice would have guaranteed a better result. But this is imagination, not reality. You cannot know what would have happened. Buddhism invites you to release these mental rewrites. They add suffering without offering insight. Anxiety thrives on future projection. It asks endless questions about what your actions will lead to. Trust brings attention back to what is happening now. It says, focus on the quality of this moment. The future will arrive on its own terms. This does not eliminate planning. It frees you from emotional dependency on plans succeeding. There is also freedom in realizing that wisdom does not always look wise from the outside. Sometimes doing the right thing leads to loss, misunderstanding, or delay. If you only trust actions that are rewarded, you limit your life to what is safe and socially approved. Trusting the gap allows you to act according to values, even when applause does not follow. This is especially important in relationships. You can speak kindly and still be misunderstood. You can set boundaries and still be blamed. You can love sincerely and still be left. If outcomes define your trust, you will conclude that honesty, care, and vulnerability are mistakes. Buddhism teaches otherwise. It teaches that the value of these actions is intrinsic. When you trust the gap, you stop bargaining with life. You stop thinking, if I do this right, then everything will be okay. This bargain creates constant tension. You're always waiting to see if the deal holds. Letting it go brings relief. You act because it is right to act, not because you expect a specific return. This does not make you passive, it makes you resilient. You can adapt without losing faith. You can change course without self-blame. You can continue even when progress is invisible. This is how anxiety loosens at its root. Anxiety depends on the belief that safety lies in predictable outcomes. Trust sees safety in responsiveness. Over time, you notice that your nervous system begins to relax. You are no longer bracing for judgment from the future. You are less afraid of uncertainty because you are not using it as a measure of your worth. You accept that life is not a report card. Buddhist practice often emphasizes right action without attachment to results. This does not mean you do not care. It means you care without clinging. Clinging turns effort into tension. Letting go turns effort into presence. You also begin to understand that some outcomes take time to reveal their meaning. What looks like failure now may become clarity later. What feels like loss may redirect you towards something more aligned. Trust allows you to wait without despair. Trusting the gap also deepens humility. You stop assuming you know what is best in every situation. You remain open to learning from what unfolds. This openness keeps wisdom alive. Certainty based on results hardens. Trust based on intention stays flexible. As this understanding settles, your relationship with success changes. Success becomes a byproduct, not a requirement. When it comes, you receive it with gratitude, not attachment. When it does not, you remain intact. This balance protects you from burnout and bitterness. You also become more compassionate toward others. You stop judging people solely by outcomes. You see the effort behind actions. You recognize that many people are doing their best within complex conditions. This perspective reduces anger and increases patience. Eventually, you notice that trust feels less like confidence and more like steadiness. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply remains present, regardless of how events unfold. You stop asking life to prove itself to you. You stop asking your choices to guarantee safety. And so the walking continues, now with a lighter heart. You act with care, knowing that results are not a verdict. You rest in the knowledge that wisdom is not invalidated by disappointment, and integrity is not measured by outcomes. The gap remains, but it no longer feels threatening. It becomes space. Space to breathe, space to learn, space to trust life as it is, not as you hoped it would be. As the gap between intention and outcome becomes less threatening, another habit quietly reveals itself. You notice how often you pause, not because you are incapable, but because you are waiting to understand everything first. You wait for certainty to arrive. You wait for insight to appear. You wait for the feeling that says, now it makes sense. And in that waiting, life slows. Not because the path is blocked, but because you are standing still, hoping wisdom will come before movement. There is a deep emotional pull in wanting clarity before action. It feels responsible, it feels mature, it feels safe. But very often this waiting is not wisdom. It is fear wearing thoughtful clothing, fear of embarrassment, fear of regret, fear of stepping into something you cannot yet explain. Buddhism does not judge this fear. It simply sees it clearly and asks a different question. What if understanding is not the doorway, but the echo? Many of the most important insights in life arrive late. They show up after the conversation, not before it. After the loss, not before it. After the risk, not before it. The mind wants a preview, a guarantee, a clear explanation before it commits. But life rarely works that way. Wisdom often waits until you are already moving. Buddhist teachings recognize this pattern. They do not ask you to be reckless. They ask you to be honest about where clarity actually comes from. Insight is not always a light that guides the step. Sometimes it is the warmth you feel after the step has already been taken. If you refuse to move until you understand, you may never understand at all. Waiting for clarity can feel like patience, but there is a subtle difference between patience and avoidance. Patience stays present. Avoidance delays. Patience listens deeply. Avoidance demands certainty. When you watch yourself closely, you can feel the difference in the body. Patience feels grounded. Avoidance feels tight. Walking before understanding requires trust in experience itself. It means allowing life to teach you through contact, not theory. Buddhism values direct experience over conceptual knowledge. Words can point, but they cannot replace the act of walking. You can read about water endlessly, but until you touch it, it remains an idea. This does not mean thinking is useless. It means thinking has limits. The mind is excellent at analyzing what has already happened. It struggles with what has not yet occurred. When you ask it to predict how a future step will feel, it fills the unknown with fear or fantasy. Neither is reliable. Insight that arrives late has a different quality. It is embodied. It settles into your muscles, your breath, your posture. It is not just something you know, it is something you recognize. This kind of wisdom cannot be rushed or forced. It emerges when the conditions are right, and one of those conditions is movement. Many people confuse hesitation with depth. They believe that the more they think, the more mature their decision will be. But excessive thinking often leads to paralysis, not wisdom. The mind begins to chase its own tail. Each answer creates a new question. Each possibility opens another branch. Soon, clarity feels further away than when you started. Buddhism encourages a different relationship with not knowing. Not knowing is not treated as a flaw to fix, but as a space to step into. When you walk without understanding, you are not ignoring wisdom. You are allowing it to form in real time. This is especially true when it comes to personal growth. You cannot think your way into becoming someone new. Transformation requires action, new behaviors, new environments, new risks. Insight often follows these changes, not precedes them. You understand who you are becoming only after you begin becoming. Waiting for clarity can also be a way of avoiding responsibility. As long as you do not act, you cannot fail. You cannot be judged. You cannot be disappointed. The price of this safety is stagnation. Buddhism does not shame this tendency. It simply points out the cost. Walking before understanding builds a different kind of confidence. Not confidence in your predictions, but confidence in your capacity to respond. You learn that you do not need to know everything to handle what comes next. This realization is deeply calming. When insight arrives late, it often comes with humility. You see how limited your earlier assumptions were. You realize that the mind could not have grasped what the experience revealed. This humility keeps you open. It prevents rigid beliefs from forming. This approach also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Uncertainty stops being an enemy and becomes a companion. You carry it with you instead of trying to eliminate it. This makes movement lighter. You are no longer dragging the weight of needing to be sure. In Buddhist practice, walking meditation embodies this principle. You take one step, then another. You do not rush ahead mentally. You stay with the movement. Understanding arises from the rhythm, not from analysis. Life itself can be approached this way. Walking before understanding does not mean ignoring intuition. It means listening to it without demanding explanations. Intuition often speaks softly. It offers direction without justification. The mind wants reasons. Trust allows action without them. This can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you were taught that every decision must be rationalized. But over time, you notice that many of your best choices were made without full clarity. You felt your way forward. Only later did the meaning become clear. When you stop waiting for understanding, you also stop postponing your life. You engage more fully. You learn faster. You adapt more easily. Mistakes become information instead of proof that you should not have moved. This does not mean rushing blindly. It means distinguishing between thoughtful hesitation and fear-based delay. The body often knows which one you are in. Tightness signals fear. Presence signals readiness. As you practice this, you notice a shift in how you experience wisdom. Wisdom stops feeling like something you must achieve and starts feeling like something that meets you along the way. You are not chasing it. You are allowing it to catch up. There is also a deep kindness in this approach. You stop demanding perfection from yourself before allowing movement. You accept that learning is messy. That clarity is uneven. That understanding comes in waves. Over time, the fear that kept you waiting loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because you stop obeying it. You learn that fear is not a reliable guide for timing. It always asks you to wait longer. Walking before understanding is an act of trust in life's intelligence. It assumes that experience itself carries wisdom, that the path teaches through contact, that you do not need to see the entire picture to take the next step. As this understanding settles, you realize something quietly powerful. You have been waiting for wisdom to give you permission to live, but wisdom was waiting for you to move. When you stop waiting for wisdom to arrive first, you begin to feel the real terrain under your feet, not the story of the terrain itself. And what you notice is simple and unsettling. Uncertainty does not disappear just because you are moving. Insight may catch up, but the unknown still surrounds you. The future remains unclaimed. The next turn remains hidden. This is where a deeper lesson begins, because now the question is not how to remove uncertainty, but how to live with it without losing your center. A lot of people treat uncertainty like a problem that must be solved. They speak of it as if it is a temporary storm, and certainty is the clear sky that will return. They believe peace is something you earn when the unknown finally goes away, but life does not operate like that. The unknown is not an exception. It is the basic condition of being alive. Buddhist teachings do not treat uncertainty as an enemy. They treat it as reality. And trust, in this view, is not confidence about what will happen. It is a relationship with what you cannot know. It is learning how to stand close to the unknown without demanding it become familiar. This is where most people misunderstand trust. They think trust means feeling sure, feeling safe, feeling guaranteed. But if trust depends on certainty, then trust is weak, because certainty is rare. Most of the time, life gives partial information. It gives hints, not guarantees. It gives seasons, not schedules. So if your peace depends on certainty, you will live in constant tension. Trust as a relationship with uncertainty means you stop trying to control what cannot be controlled, and you start developing the ability to stay present inside what is unclear. This is not passive, it is active intimacy. It is the willingness to meet the unknown directly rather than turning away from it. Intimacy with the unknown sounds poetic, but it is practical. It means you stop treating uncertainty as a sign that something is wrong. You stop interpreting the lack of clarity as a personal failure. You begin to see that uncertainty is not blocking your life, it is shaping it. A relationship is built through repeated contact. Trust with uncertainty grows the same way. You do not wake up one day and become fearless. You practice staying. You practice breathing when you want to escape. You practice taking the next step even when your mind complains. Over time, your nervous system learns something important. The unknown is uncomfortable, but it is not lethal. This changes anxiety in a deep way. Anxiety often comes from treating uncertainty as danger. The mind tries to protect you by creating scenarios, predictions, and worst-case plans. It wants to eliminate risk by imagining everything. But this mental activity does not create safety. It creates exhaustion. Buddhism teaches that the mind's attempt to control the future is a form of suffering. Not because planning is wrong, but because clinging is painful. Planning can be useful. Clinging to the plan is what creates fear. The plan becomes a lifeboat you refuse to let go of, even when it is pulling you under. Trust as intimacy with uncertainty means you stop gripping the lifeboat so tightly. You still act, you still choose, you still prepare. But you accept that life may rearrange your plans. You stop taking that rearrangement as betrayal. One reason uncertainty feels unbearable is because of the stories we attach to it. The mind says, if I don't know what's next, I will suffer. If I don't control this, I will be abandoned. If I can't predict it, I will be humiliated. These stories turn uncertainty into a threat. Buddhist practice helps you separate uncertainty from the story about it. Uncertainty is simply not knowing. The story is what makes it scary. When you learn to stay with not knowing without adding the story, the fear begins to soften. You still don't know, but you are not panicking about it. This is why mindfulness is central in Buddhism. Mindfulness is not just being calm, it is the practice of seeing clearly what is happening right now without piling extra interpretation on top. When you are mindful, uncertainty becomes a fact, not a monster. There is also a hidden gift inside uncertainty. It keeps life open. If everything were certain, there would be no growth, no surprise, no possibility. Uncertainty is what allows new outcomes to appear. It is what allows change. It is what allows healing to take forms you could not plan. Most people say they want change, but they fear uncertainty. The truth is, you cannot separate the two. Change and uncertainty arrive together. If you demand certainty, you demand stagnation. Trust means being willing to pay the price of openness. A relationship with uncertainty also changes how you experience control. Many people think control brings peace, but too much control creates rigidity. It makes you fragile. When something unexpected happens, you break. Trust makes you flexible. It teaches you to bend, to adjust, to respond. Flexibility is stronger than control. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize impermanence. Everything changes, not as a threat, but as a truth. When you accept impermanence, you stop trying to freeze life in place. You stop trying to hold people, situations, and feelings as if they should stay the same. You allow change without collapsing. Trust becomes the ability to remain steady while things shift. It does not mean you like the shift. It means you can stay present with it. You can grieve without being destroyed. You can face uncertainty without abandoning yourself. There is a difference between uncertainty and insecurity. Uncertainty is about not knowing the future. Insecurity is about not trusting your ability to meet it. Buddhism helps build security inside uncertainty by strengthening your inner refuge. Inner refuge does not mean hiding from the world. It means having practices that bring you back to center. The breath, awareness, compassion, wise reflection. These are not abstract ideas. They are skills you cultivate. When uncertainty rises, you return to these skills instead of spiraling into panic. Another part of intimacy with uncertainty is letting yourself feel what you usually avoid. Many people try to think their way out of uncertainty, but uncertainty is felt in the body. It shows up as tightness, restlessness, pressure. Trust involves staying with these sensations without immediately trying to fix them. This is not easy. The body wants relief. The mind wants answers. But each time you stay, even briefly, you teach yourself that you can survive discomfort. This is how courage is built. Not through dramatic moments, but through small acts of staying. Trust also means accepting that you cannot control how others respond. You can act with integrity, but you cannot control reactions. If you demand certainty in relationships, you will become controlling, anxious, or withdrawn. Intimacy with uncertainty allows you to love without clinging, to communicate without forcing outcomes, to care without trying to manage every response. This does not make you naive, it makes you mature. You stop confusing love with control. You stop confusing safety with certainty. You start seeing that real connection requires openness, and openness includes risk. Buddhist trust is often described as confidence in the path, not in the outcome. The path is practice, awareness, returning, beginning again. This confidence is steady because it does not depend on life behaving predictably. It depends on your willingness to meet life as it is. A key part of this is letting go of the demand for reassurance. Reassurance is a temporary relief that often strengthens anxiety in the long run. Each time you need reassurance, you tell your nervous system that uncertainty is dangerous. Trust teaches you to tolerate uncertainty long enough for the nervous system to settle on its own. This is where intimacy grows, not in the absence of fear, but in staying close to fear without letting it rule you. You also begin to see that the unknown is not just out there, it is inside you too. You do not fully know who you will become. You do not fully know how you will change. Many people fear this internal unknown. They cling to identity because it feels stable, but identity is also impermanent. Trust means letting yourself evolve without needing a fixed image. As you practice this, you begin to experience a different kind of peace. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of openness. It is quieter, less dramatic. It does not depend on perfect conditions. It is the peace of being able to say, I don't know what's next, and I can still breathe. This is the heart of Buddhist trust. It is not about predicting the future. It is about relating to the unknown with presence rather than resistance. It is learning to walk with uncertainty as a companion, not as a threat. And when you truly start relating to uncertainty this way, you notice something surprising. The unknown does not feel as cold as it used to. It still has shadows, but it also has space. Space for possibility, space for wisdom to keep arriving, space for life to keep unfolding without needing your permission. As uncertainty becomes less of an enemy and more of a companion, another habit quietly comes into focus. It shows up in small moments. A glance at the phone, a question asked one more time, a subtle hope that someone, something, or some sign will finally settle the discomfort. Even when you accept not knowing, there is still the urge to be reassured, to be told you are on the right path, to hear that everything will be okay. This urge feels harmless, but it shapes trust in ways most people never notice. Reassurance feels like relief. It softens the nervous system for a moment. It quiets the mind briefly. But relief is not the same as trust. Relief fades quickly, and when it does, the question returns stronger than before. The habit grows. The mind learns that uncertainty must be neutralized immediately, and slowly, inner trust weakens. Buddhist teachings are very precise here. They do not shame the need for reassurance. They understand it as a natural response to fear, but they also show its cost. Each time you demand reassurance, you send yourself a message. I cannot stay with not knowing. I need something outside me to stabilize this moment. Over time, this belief becomes automatic. Trust deepens when you stop demanding answers before you are ready to receive them. This does not mean you never ask questions. It means you notice when questions are asked not from curiosity, but from panic. Panic questions are not seeking truth. They are seeking escape. The discipline of not demanding reassurance is subtle. It does not look heroic. Often it looks like sitting quietly with discomfort, like allowing the body to feel unsettled without rushing to soothe it, like letting a question remain open longer than feels comfortable. This is a discipline because it goes against the mind's instinct to resolve tension immediately. Unanswered questions feel threatening because the mind believes they mean danger. But most unanswered questions are simply unresolved experiences. They do not require immediate closure. Buddhism teaches that clarity ripens in its own time. When you force it early, you often get false certainty, not wisdom. Reassurance seeking can take many forms: asking others for validation, replaying decisions to look for confirmation, searching for signs, patterns, or guarantees. Even excessive planning can be a form of reassurance seeking when it is driven by fear rather than practicality. All of these behaviors share the same root: discomfort with uncertainty. The problem is not the question itself. The problem is the demand that the question must be answered now in order for you to feel safe. This demand creates dependency. You begin to outsource your stability to external sources. When they are not available, anxiety spikes. Buddhist practice invites you to stay with the question instead, to let it exist without resolving it. This is not passive. It is an active willingness to remain present with what you do not know. It trains the nervous system to tolerate ambiguity. When you stay with an unanswered question, something interesting happens. At first, the discomfort intensifies. The mind protests. It tells you this is irresponsible, that you are wasting time, that you should be doing something. But if you stay, the intensity begins to soften, not because the question is answered, but because your relationship to it changes. You learn that not knowing does not destroy you. You learn that discomfort rises and falls on its own. This learning is embodied, not intellectual. It builds a quiet confidence that reassurance can never provide. Reassurance gives temporary calm. Staying with unanswered questions builds long-term resilience. One teaches you to escape discomfort. The other teaches you to meet it. This is why reassurance seeking erodes trust. It trains avoidance. In Buddhism, there is a deep respect for questions that do not have immediate answers. Some teachings are designed not to be solved, but to be lived with. They stretch the mind. They reveal attachment to certainty. They expose fear. The practice is not to eliminate the question, but to let it transform you. When you stop demanding reassurance, you also stop constantly scanning others for approval. You become less reactive to feedback. Praise feels pleasant, but not necessary. Criticism feels uncomfortable, but not devastating. Your sense of direction becomes more internal. This does not mean you become closed off or stubborn. It means you listen without collapsing. You consider input without handing over authority. You trust your capacity to reflect rather than needing immediate validation. The discipline here is learning to pause between uncertainty and action, not to freeze, but to stay present, to feel the urge to seek reassurance and not act on it immediately. This pause is powerful. It interrupts an old pattern. Over time, you notice that many of the questions you were desperate to answer lose their urgency. They dissolve on their own. Others evolve. They become more refined, more honest. When answers do arrive, they feel quieter and more grounded. Another effect of reassurance seeking is that it keeps you focused on outcomes. You want to know if things will turn out well, if you are safe, if you will be okay. Letting go of reassurance shifts your attention back to the present moment. What is happening now? What is needed now? This shift reduces anxiety at its root. Anxiety lives in anticipation. It feeds on imagined futures. Staying with unanswered questions anchors you in the present. You are no longer living 5 steps ahead, Buddhism does not promise certainty. It promises practice, the practice of returning, the practice of observing, the practice of compassion toward discomfort. These practices become your reassurance, not because they answer questions, but because they stabilize you. You also begin to notice that reassurance often comes with conditions. People reassure you based on their own fears, hopes, or limitations. Their reassurance may not be accurate. Depending on, it can lead you away from your own truth. Trust grows when you learn to sit with your own uncertainty without rushing to fill it. This sitting is not empty. It is full of information, sensations, emotions, subtle signals. When you are not chasing reassurance, you can actually hear yourself. This practice also reveals how often reassurance seeking is linked to self-doubt. You do not trust your perception, your timing, your feelings. Buddhism encourages gentle investigation here, not judgment. You ask, what am I afraid will happen if I don't get reassurance right now? Often the fear is exaggerated. Staying with unanswered questions also deepens patience. You stop needing immediate resolution. You allow life to unfold at its own pace. This patience is not passive waiting. It is active presence. There is strength in saying, I don't know yet, and letting that be true. This strength is quiet. It does not impress others, but it steadies you. It gives you room to respond wisely instead of reactively. As you practice this discipline, you begin to experience a different kind of trust. Not trust that everything will be okay, but trust that you can stay with whatever is not okay yet. This trust is durable. It does not depend on answers arriving on schedule. Eventually, you notice that reassurance loses its grip. You still appreciate it when it comes, but you no longer chase it. You no longer need it to move forward. Questions remain, but they no longer feel like emergencies. And from this place, something opens, a deeper listening, a steadier presence, a trust that does not demand proof. You are no longer asking life to calm you down before you live. You are living and letting calm arise on its own terms. As the need for reassurance loosens, another impulse becomes easier to notice. It arrives quietly, often disguised as logic or self-care. The urge to leave, to distract, to fix the situation quickly, to mentally plan an exit before anything has actually gone wrong. You may not even stand up or walk away, but inside you are already gone. Trust deepens when this habit is seen clearly, because sometimes trust does not mean changing what you feel or where you are. Sometimes trust means staying. There is a common belief that discomfort is a signal to escape. That if something feels heavy, tense, or confusing, the wise response is to remove yourself from it as fast as possible. This belief is deeply conditioned. From a young age, we learn to associate safety with relief. When discomfort arises, the mind immediately searches for a way out, a distraction, a solution, a justification, a future moment where things will finally feel better. Buddhist teachings do not deny that some situations require action or boundaries, but they point out something subtle and important. Much of our suffering does not come from the discomfort itself. It comes from the constant inner movement away from it, the refusal to stay with what is here without narrating an escape. Staying does not mean enduring harm or ignoring wisdom. It means recognizing when the impulse to leave is driven by fear rather than clarity. It means noticing how quickly the mind starts telling stories about how this moment should not be happening, how it must be fixed, how you cannot handle it. These stories create more pain than the original sensation ever did. Trust, in this context, is the willingness to remain present inside discomfort without immediately trying to change it. This is one of the most challenging practices because it goes against the mind's survival training. The mind equates discomfort with danger. Staying feels risky. It feels exposed. It feels like something bad might happen if you do not act. But when you stay, you begin to see something important. Discomfort is not static. It moves. It shifts. It has texture and rhythm. It rises and falls. When you stop narrating an exit, you create space to experience this movement directly. Many people live in a constant state of internal escape. Even when they are physically present, their attention is elsewhere, planning the next task, replaying the past, fantasizing about a future where things are easier. This mental leaving is so habitual that it feels normal. But it comes at a cost. You are never fully here. Buddhism teaches that presence is not about forcing yourself to feel calm. It is about allowing what is already here to be known. Staying does not require liking the experience. It requires honesty. You acknowledge discomfort without adding commentary about how long it should last or what it means about you. When you stay, you stop feeding the cycle of avoidance. Avoidance teaches the nervous system that discomfort is unbearable. Staying teaches it that discomfort is survivable. This learning does not happen through thinking. It happens through direct experience. At first, staying can feel overwhelming. The body may tighten, the breath may become shallow, the urge to escape may intensify. This is normal. You are interrupting a long-standing habit. The key is not to stay perfectly, but to stay gently. Even a few seconds of presence is enough to begin rewiring the pattern. Trust here is not dramatic. It does not feel like courage in the way movies portray it. It feels quiet, ordinary, sometimes boring. You sit, you breathe, you notice, you do not run. This simplicity is powerful because it removes fuel from fear. Another layer of this practice is staying without narrating an exit. The mind loves to create a story that leads away from the present. It says, "Once this is over, then I will be okay." Or, "I just need to get through this." Or, "I should not be feeling this way." These narratives subtly pull you out of the moment. You are technically still here, but psychologically, you are already gone. Trust asks you to drop the story, not to replace it with a positive one, but to rest in direct experience. What does the discomfort actually feel like right now? Not what does it mean, not how long will it last. Just what is it, moment to moment. This practice reveals that much of what we fear is the anticipation, not the experience itself. The mind's commentary is often harsher than reality. When you stay, the commentary loses volume. Sensations become more manageable when they are not amplified by story. Staying also changes how you relate to emotions. Many people believe emotions are problems to solve. If sadness appears, they look for a reason. If anxiety appears, they look for reassurance. If anger appears, they look for an outlet. Buddhism offers another option. Stay with the emotion without turning it into a task. Emotions are energy. They move when they are allowed to be felt. When you escape them, they get stuck. Staying allows completion, not resolution in the intellectual sense, but release in the bodily sense. This does not mean wallowing. Wallowing is staying with the story. Presence is staying with the sensation. The difference is subtle but important. Stories loop. Sensations change. Trusting life in this way means believing that you do not have to micromanage every internal experience, that your system has its own intelligence, that feelings know how to move if you stop interfering. Another reason staying feels difficult is because of identity. You may believe that if you stay with discomfort, it will define you, that you will become the anxious person, the sad person, the confused person. Escaping feels like protecting your identity. But identity is not fixed by a feeling. It is shaped by how you relate to it. When you stay, you learn that feelings pass through you. They do not become you. This realization weakens fear at its root. You stop treating emotions as threats to your sense of self. Staying also builds trust in time. You stop demanding immediate change. You allow moments to unfold at their own pace. This patience is not passive. It is attentive. You are engaged without being controlling. In Buddhist practice, this is often described as equanimity, not indifference, but balance. You allow pleasant and unpleasant experiences to arise and pass without clinging or rejecting. This balance creates inner stability that does not depend on circumstances. Trusting by staying does not mean you never leave situations that are harmful or misaligned. It means you discern the difference between wise action and fear-driven escape. Fear escapes to feel better. Wisdom stays long enough to see clearly. When you practice staying, you become less reactive. You stop making decisions solely to relieve discomfort. This leads to better choices. Choices rooted in values rather than avoidance. You also become more available to others. When you are not constantly trying to escape your own discomfort, you can stay present with someone else's. You listen better. You respond more thoughtfully. You are not rushing to fix or flee. Another effect of staying is that it reveals patterns. When you stop escaping, you start noticing what repeats. The same feelings, the same triggers, the same stories. This awareness is the beginning of real change. You cannot transform what you refuse to look at. Trusting life by staying also means trusting your capacity to endure. Not endure forever, but endure long enough for insight to arise, long enough for the body to settle, long enough for the situation to reveal itself. This capacity is already in you. It has been there through every difficult moment you have survived. Staying simply reconnects you with it. Over time, staying becomes less effortful. You no longer panic when discomfort appears. You recognize it as part of the human experience. You meet it with curiosity instead of resistance. This does not make life painless. It makes it honest. Pain still happens, but it is not compounded by constant fleeing. Trust, in this sense, is deeply grounded. It is not belief in a better future. It is confidence in your ability to be present now, even when now is uncomfortable, even when now does not make sense. And as this practice deepens, something quietly changes. The urge to escape loses urgency. You no longer need to be somewhere else to feel okay. You are here, breathing, aware, still moving forward, not by running away, but by staying long enough to let life meet you where you are. When you learn to stay instead of escape, something subtle becomes impossible to ignore. Beneath the thoughts, beneath the explanations, beneath the stories about what should happen next, there is movement, sensation, a quiet signal that does not speak in words. Even when the mind is undecided, something in you already knows how it feels to be here. This is where trust begins to move deeper, away from thinking and into listening. Most people are taught to trust their mind above all else, to analyze, to justify, to explain, to wait until every choice makes sense on paper before acting. The body, in this training, becomes secondary, a vehicle, a nuisance, something to manage after decisions are made. But Buddhist understanding does not separate wisdom from the body. It recognizes that the body often perceives truth before the mind can organize it into logic. There are moments when the mind stalls. It circles, it debates endlessly, it wants certainty, reasons, guarantees. And yet, in those same moments, the body responds clearly. A tightening when something is wrong, a softening when something aligns, a heaviness that warns, a subtle ease that invites. These signals are not mystical, they are biological, emotional, and deeply intelligent. Trusting the body before the mind agrees does not mean abandoning reason. It means recognizing that reason is sometimes late. The mind works with concepts and predictions. The body works with immediacy. It responds to what is happening now, not to what might happen later. This makes it a powerful source of information when the future is unclear. Many people struggle to hear the body because they have been trained not to. From a young age, discomfort is overridden. Hunger is ignored. Fatigue is pushed through. Emotional reactions are dismissed. Over time, the body's signals become faint, not because they are weak, but because they are consistently ignored. Buddhist practice invites a return to embodied awareness. Attention is brought back to breath, posture, sensation. not as a relaxation technique, but as a way of learning how truth feels. The body does not lie in the same way the mind can. It does not rationalize fear or disguise desire as logic. It reacts honestly. When you trust the body, you begin to notice patterns. Certain environments drain you. Certain conversations tighten your chest. Certain decisions bring a quiet relief even when they are difficult. These patterns are not random. They are the body's way of communicating boundaries, values, and readiness. The challenge is that the body rarely provides explanations. It offers signals, not arguments. The mind, trained to demand reasons, becomes uncomfortable with this. It asks, why do I feel this way? What does it mean? What if I'm wrong? This is where trust is required. Trust to act without full intellectual agreement. Listening to the body does not mean acting on impulse. Impulse is reactive. Somatic truth is steady. Impulse feels urgent and chaotic. Somatic truth feels grounded, even when it is uncomfortable. Learning to tell the difference takes practice. One way this practice develops is through staying with sensation rather than immediately interpreting it. When a feeling arises, instead of asking what it means, you ask what it feels like. Tight or loose, heavy or light, warm or cold. This keeps you connected to direct experience instead of mental speculation. Over time, you learn that the body often knows when something is not aligned long before the mind admits it. You may stay in a situation because it makes sense logically, while your body slowly contracts. Fatigue increases, tension becomes chronic, motivation fades. These are not failures of will. They are signals of misalignment. Trusting the body also changes how you experience fear. Fear is often felt first in the body. A racing heart, a shallow breath, a tightening throat. When you listen carefully, you begin to distinguish between fear that warns of real danger and fear that arises from growth. They feel different. One is sharp and panicked. The other is nervous, but alive. The mind tends to treat all fear the same. The body does not. Trusting the body helps you move forward, even when fear is present, because you can feel whether the fear is telling you to stop or simply to be careful. This is especially important when facing change. The mind resists change because it threatens familiarity. The body may respond with a mix of fear and excitement. If you wait for the mind to feel comfortable, you may wait forever. Growth often feels uncomfortable at first. The body senses the vitality in it, even when the mind resists. Buddhist teachings emphasize mindfulness of the body for this reason. The body anchors awareness in the present. It prevents the mind from drifting too far into fear-based projections. When you attend to the body, you are reminded that you are here, breathing, alive. This steadiness allows intuition to emerge. Trusting the body also helps regulate emotion. When you listen to bodily cues, you can respond before emotions escalate. You notice tension before it becomes anger. You notice fatigue before it becomes burnout. This early awareness is a form of wisdom that prevents unnecessary suffering. There is also humility in trusting the body. You accept that you do not always know why something feels right or wrong. You allow yourself to be guided by experience rather than control. This humility keeps you flexible. You adjust when new information appears. Many people fear trusting the body because they worry it will lead them astray. But ignoring the body often leads to greater confusion. When you override bodily signals repeatedly, the mind becomes disconnected from reality. Decisions become abstract. Life feels mechanical. Reconnecting with the body restores a sense of aliveness. You feel more present, more responsive, more engaged. This engagement builds trust because you are no longer making choices from a detached place. Trusting the body also deepens self-respect. You stop forcing yourself into situations that feel wrong just to meet expectations. You honor limits. You listen to fatigue. You rest without guilt. This respect creates internal safety. Internal safety is essential for trust. When the body feels ignored or abused, it remains in a state of vigilance. When it feels listened to, it relaxes. Relaxation does not mean laziness, it means readiness. The body also holds memory. Past experiences are stored somatically. Sometimes a reaction does not make sense intellectually, but the body remembers something the mind has forgotten. Trusting the body allows these memories to inform your choices without needing full narrative recall. This does not mean every bodily reaction is accurate. Trauma can distort signals. Conditioning can confuse sensation. This is why Buddhist practice emphasizes gentle awareness rather than blind obedience. You listen, you observe, you reflect. You do not rush. Over time, the dialogue between body and mind becomes more balanced. The mind stops dominating. The body stops being ignored. Decisions become more integrated. You feel them as much as you think them. Trusting the body before the mind agrees also changes how you experience uncertainty. When you do not know what will happen, you return to what is happening now. Sensation, breath, ground. This anchors you. You are no longer lost in speculation. This practice also supports staying instead of escaping. When discomfort arises, you check in with the body. Can I stay with this sensation? Is it tolerable? Is it informative? Often the body says yes, even when the mind says no. As you continue walking this path, trust becomes less about belief and more about attunement. You are attuned to yourself, to your environment, to the moment. You respond rather than react. This does not make life predictable, it makes it navigable. You may not know where the path leads, but you know how to listen as you walk. Eventually you realize something quietly profound. The body has been guiding you all along, not loudly, not forcefully, patiently. Trusting it now is not learning something new, it is remembering something you once knew instinctively, and so you continue. Not because everything makes sense, but because something in you feels steady enough to move. The mind may catch up later. For now, the body knows how to take the next step. As the body begins to guide you more honestly than thought, another quiet shift happens. You notice that trust no longer feels like an idea you hold in your head. It feels lived, felt, tested through movement and response. And this raises a deeper question that many people have never been taught to ask. If trust is working without explanations, without guarantees, without full understanding, then what does it actually rest on? Not belief, not doctrine, not promises, something else. Most people assume faith requires belief, a system, a story about how things work, a structure that explains suffering, rewards goodness, and guarantees meaning. When those beliefs are shaken, faith collapses. This is why so many people feel lost when old explanations stop working. Their trust was attached to ideas, not experience. Buddhist trust is different. It does not ask you to believe anything before you begin. It does not demand loyalty to a doctrine or agreement with a worldview. It asks for something far more challenging: direct contact with experience exactly as it is. This is faith without belief, not blind acceptance, not rejection either, just attention, just willingness to see what happens when you stay present. Buddhism does not say trust this teaching because it is true. It says test it, see for yourself. If it reduces suffering, continue. If it does not, let it go. This approach is unsettling for people who want certainty. Belief systems provide comfort because they promise meaning in advance. They tell you what things mean before you encounter them. Buddhist trust refuses this shortcut. Meaning is not delivered ahead of time. It emerges through engagement. Faith without belief means you do not need to convince yourself that everything happens for a reason. You do not need to believe life is fair. You do not need to promise yourself that pain will be rewarded. You only need to stay present enough to respond wisely to what is happening now. This is deeply freeing, but also deeply confronting. Without belief to lean on, you cannot bypass discomfort with explanation. You cannot say this is happening because it was meant to. You cannot hide behind ideology. You meet reality directly. Many people fear this kind of trust because they associate it with emptiness. They worry that without belief, life will feel meaningless. Buddhism offers a different view. Meaning is not something you impose on life. It is something you discover through attention. When you stop believing in fixed explanations, curiosity returns. You stop assuming you already know what an experience means. You observe, you listen, you notice patterns. Insight becomes something you earn through presence, not something you inherit through belief. Faith without belief also protects you from disappointment. Belief systems often collapse when life does not match their promises. People feel betrayed by existence itself. Buddhist trust avoids this trap because it makes no promises. It does not say things will turn out well. It says pay attention. Paying attention builds a different kind of confidence. You trust not because you expect life to behave in a certain way, but because you trust your capacity to respond. You trust awareness itself. This kind of trust is resilient. It survives loss, confusion, and injustice because it does not depend on them making sense. It does not require explanations to remain intact. It remains grounded in what is actually happening. Buddhist practice emphasizes this again and again. Do not cling to views. Do not turn teachings into rigid beliefs. Use them as tools. When a tool no longer helps, set it down. This flexibility prevents ideology from becoming a prison. Ideology often divides the world into right and wrong, true and false, saved and lost. Faith without belief does not operate this way. It focuses on suffering and its reduction. It asks simple questions. Does this action create harm? Does this thought increase suffering? Does this response bring clarity or confusion? These questions are practical. They do not require belief. They require honesty. Trust beyond ideology also allows doubt to exist without panic. Doubt is not treated as a failure of faith. It is treated as a natural part of inquiry. When you are not forced to believe, doubt becomes curiosity instead of threat. This changes your relationship with uncertainty even further. You no longer need to resolve uncertainty by adopting beliefs. You let uncertainty remain open. You investigate it through experience. Direct experience is central here. Buddhism does not ask you to trust ideas about the body. It asks you to notice breath. It does not ask you to believe theories about suffering. It asks you to notice how craving feels. This keeps trust grounded. When trust is grounded in experience, it adapts. What you learn at one stage may not apply at another. This is not failure. It is responsiveness. You adjust as conditions change. Faith without belief also reduces conflict. When you are not attached to being right, you listen more. You do not need to defend a worldview. You are interested in understanding suffering, not winning arguments. This approach also removes spiritual pressure. You do not need to feel a certain way. You do not need to maintain faith during hardship. You simply continue practicing awareness. Even doubt becomes part of the path. Many people secretly fear that without belief they will lose motivation, that they will drift. Buddhism addresses this by anchoring practice in suffering and compassion. You continue not because of promises, but because attention reduces suffering. This is motivation rooted in reality. Trust without belief also allows grief to exist without explanation. You do not rush to make sense of loss. You stay with the pain. You allow it. This honesty deepens compassion for yourself and others. This kind of trust also resists manipulation. When trust is tied to belief, it can be exploited. People can use promises and fear to control behavior. Trust grounded in experience is harder to hijack. It belongs to you. As this understanding deepens, you notice that trust feels quieter, less dramatic, less emotional. It does not rely on hope or despair. It is steady. It shows up in small choices, in attention, in restraint, in care. You stop asking, "What should I believe?" and start asking, "What is actually happening?" This question keeps you grounded. Faith without belief does not mean rejecting meaning. It means allowing meaning to emerge naturally. Meaning is found in how you respond to suffering, not in explanations about why suffering exists. Over time, this approach creates deep humility. You accept that you do not have the final answer. You stop searching for ultimate explanations. You focus on living wisely within uncertainty. This humility is not weakness, it is strength. It keeps the heart open. It prevents rigidity. It allows learning to continue. Trust beyond ideology also brings relief. You no longer need to carry a worldview on your back. You travel lighter. You meet each moment fresh. You still value teachings. You still learn from tradition. But you do not turn them into beliefs that override your experience. Experience remains primary. As you continue walking, you realize something quietly powerful. You do not need belief to trust life. You need presence. You need honesty. You need willingness to stay with what is. This trust does not shout. It does not promise. It simply remains. And in remaining, it reveals something belief never could. That faith is not about what you think is true. It is about how you meet what is happening now. When trust no longer depends on belief or explanation, movement begins to feel different. You stop waiting for life to confirm itself through ideas. You feel a quiet pull forward, even without a clear destination, and yet another habit waits in the background, subtle and convincing, the habit of staying still and calling it wisdom, the habit of delaying action while telling yourself you are being thoughtful. This is where trust is tested again, not through fear, but through stillness. Many people believe clarity comes before movement, that the path must reveal itself fully before they step onto it. This belief sounds reasonable, it sounds careful, but very often it hides avoidance. Not avoidance of effort, but avoidance of exposure. If you do not move, you cannot be wrong. If you stay still, you cannot fail. Stillness feels safe when movement feels uncertain. Buddhist understanding challenges this gently but firmly. It suggests that clarity is not something you wait for. It is something that unfolds through engagement. The path does not appear all at once. It reveals itself step by step in response to movement. When you walk, the ground responds. When you stay still, nothing changes. This is not a metaphor. It is a practical truth. Insight grows through contact with life. You learn by doing. You understand by participating. Without movement, understanding remains theoretical. Stillness has its place. Buddhism values stillness deeply. Meditation is stillness. Reflection is stillness. Rest is stillness. But stillness becomes avoidance when it is used to delay living, when it becomes a way to avoid decision, risk, or responsibility. The difference between true stillness and avoidance can be felt. True stillness feels alive. It is present. It is aware. Avoidant stillness feels heavy, stagnant. Time passes, but nothing integrates. The same questions repeat. The same doubts linger. Letting the path reveal the path means accepting that you cannot see far ahead. It means trusting that each step will show you something you could not have known before. This requires humility. You admit that your mind cannot plan your entire life. You allow experience to teach you. Many people stay stuck because they want certainty before commitment. They want assurance that their effort will pay off. They want to know the ending before they begin. But life does not offer this. It offers feedback, not guarantees. When you move, feedback arrives, sometimes gently, sometimes painfully, but always informatively. When you stay still, feedback is minimal. You remain in speculation. Overthinking grows because nothing new enters the system. Buddhism emphasizes action informed by awareness, not impulsive action, not rigid planning, responsive action. You step, you observe, you adjust. This is how clarity emerges, not through prediction, but through participation. Stillness can also hide fear of disappointment. If you do not move, you do not have to face the possibility that the path you choose may not lead where you hoped. But this protection comes at a cost. You also never discover where it might have led. Letting the path reveal the path means you accept that some clarity only comes in hindsight. You understand things after they happen. You see patterns after you have lived them. This does not mean you were foolish before. It means understanding matures with experience. Movement also reveals what does not work. This is valuable. Many people cling to ideas because they have not tested them. They believe something is right because they have never challenged it through action. When you move, false assumptions fall away. This is not failure, it is refinement. Each step sharpens discernment. You learn what aligns and what does not. This learning cannot be rushed or skipped. Stillness disguised as wisdom often comes with elaborate explanations. You tell yourself you are waiting for the right time, that you are gathering information, that you are being patient. Sometimes this is true. Often it is fear wearing thoughtful language. Buddhist practice encourages honesty here. You look closely at your stillness. Does it feel spacious or constricting? Does it deepen awareness or dull it? Does it bring clarity or prolong confusion? Letting the path reveal itself also changes how you relate to mistakes. When you expect clarity before action, mistakes feel unacceptable. When you expect clarity through action, mistakes are part of the process. They guide you. This approach reduces pressure. You no longer need to get everything right at once. You only need to stay responsive. You adjust as you go. This flexibility builds trust. Movement also builds confidence in a grounded way. Not confidence that you are right, but confidence that you can learn. You trust your ability to course correct. This is more durable than certainty. Stillness can feel virtuous because it avoids disruption. You do not have to explain yourself. You do not have to face judgment. But growth requires friction. Without friction, nothing changes. Letting the path reveal the path does not mean rushing. It means staying engaged. You take steps appropriate to your capacity. You do not force. You respond. This approach also respects timing. Some steps require waiting. But waiting is active when it is attentive. You watch conditions. You prepare internally. Avoidant waiting numbs awareness. Movement keeps awareness sharp. You are paying attention because something is happening. Stillness without awareness dulls perception. Buddhist teachings often emphasize walking meditation for this reason. You move slowly, deliberately, attentively. You do not rush ahead mentally. You stay with each step. This is movement as presence. Life can be lived this way. You take one step. You observe. You respond. You do not demand the full picture. Letting the path reveal itself also helps dissolve the fantasy of the perfect path. There is no flawless route. Every path includes detours, pauses, and recalibration. Trust accepts this. Stillness can become avoidance when it is motivated by the desire to avoid pain. Movement accepts that discomfort is part of growth. This acceptance reduces fear. You also begin to see that clarity is not a permanent state. It comes and goes. If you wait for lasting clarity, you may never act. Letting the path reveal the path means acting even when clarity is partial. This does not make you reckless. It makes you realistic. You stop asking life to meet impossible conditions. Movement also reveals values. You learn what matters by noticing where you invest energy. Stillness keeps values abstract. When you move, you encounter others. You receive feedback. You are shaped by relationship. This interaction refines wisdom. Stillness can isolate. Movement connects. Even when movement leads to solitude, it is chosen rather than imposed. Letting the path reveal the path also deepens trust in process. You stop needing constant confirmation. You trust the unfolding. Over time, you notice that clarity often arrives quietly, not as a sudden realization, but as a settled understanding. It feels earned, integrated. This understanding could not have arrived through thinking alone. It required living. Trust matures here. It is no longer about belief, reassurance, or certainty. It is about participation. You trust because you are engaged. And as this engagement continues, you realize something important. Stillness is no longer a hiding place. Movement is no longer a threat. You move when it is time. You rest when it is time. Both are guided by presence, not fear. The path continues to reveal itself, not because you finally understand everything, but because you are willing to keep walking without demanding that it explain itself first. As movement becomes natural and the need for full clarity fades, a quieter challenge appears. You are walking, you are showing up, you are staying present, and yet nothing seems to be changing. No visible reward, no clear sign that the effort is working. Days pass, weeks pass. The path feels the same. This is where trust is tested in its most patient form, when progress cannot be seen and time feels silent. Most people are taught to trust what they can measure. Results, milestones, feedback, proof. When those things are absent, doubt begins to creep in. The mind asks uncomfortable questions. Is this doing anything? Am I wasting my time? Shouldn't I be further along by now? These questions are not signs of failure. They are signs that you are standing in a part of the path few people talk about. Buddhist teachings understand this stage deeply. They recognize that some forms of growth are invisible by nature. They happen beneath the surface before they ever appear in form. Just as roots grow before a plant breaks the soil, inner change often develops quietly, without announcement. Trusting time means accepting that not all progress announces itself. Some changes are happening in how you respond, not in what happens, in how you relate, not in what you achieve. These changes are subtle, easy to overlook, but they are foundational. The modern mind is impatient. It wants confirmation, it wants evidence, it wants reassurance that effort equals reward. But time does not operate on this schedule. Time is not linear in the way we expect. Growth does not follow a straight line. It moves in cycles, pauses, and sudden shifts. When progress is invisible, the temptation is to abandon the practice, to change direction, to look for something that feels more productive. This is not always wrong, but often it is driven by discomfort with uncertainty rather than true insight. Buddhist trust asks you to stay committed even when nothing seems to be happening. This is not blind persistence, it is attentive patience. You continue, but you also observe. You notice small shifts, less reactivity, more space between impulse and action, a softer response where there used to be tension. These changes are easy to dismiss because they do not feel dramatic, but they are the signs of real transformation. They indicate that your relationship with experience is changing, even if your circumstances are not. Trusting time also requires releasing comparison. When you compare your progress to others, invisibility becomes painful. You assume everyone else is moving faster, that they understand something you do not. But you cannot see what others are carrying. You only see their surface. Buddhist practice turns attention inward. It asks you to measure progress not by speed, but by steadiness. Are you returning more easily to awareness? Are you less harsh with yourself? Are you able to stay present a little longer than before? These are signs of growth that time reveals gradually. Another challenge of invisible progress is boredom. When there is no novelty, the mind loses interest. It wants stimulation. It wants change. But boredom is not a problem to fix. It is a doorway. It shows you where you rely on excitement to stay engaged. Trusting time means staying even when things feel ordinary, especially then. Ordinary moments are where habits soften, where new patterns take root. When you stop chasing intensity, depth becomes possible. There is also grief in this stage. Grief for the fantasy of quick transformation. Grief for the idea that effort would be rewarded quickly. Buddhism does not deny this grief. It allows it. Letting go of unrealistic expectations is part of maturation. Time teaches in layers. The first layer is learning to show up. The second is learning to stay. The third is learning to trust when nothing confirms you are doing it right. Each layer deepens resilience. Invisible progress also tests identity. If you are not visibly improving, who are you becoming? The mind likes stories of success. Without them, identity feels uncertain. Trusting time means allowing identity to remain fluid. You do not need to know who you are becoming to keep walking. Many people quit just before a shift occurs, not because they were wrong, but because they lost patience. Time often works this way. It builds quietly, then changes suddenly. But you cannot predict when. Trust is staying without knowing. Buddhist teachings often emphasize continuity, not intensity. You do not need to practice perfectly. You need to practice consistently. Small efforts repeated over time reshape the mind. When progress is invisible, consistency feels harder. There is no emotional reward, no excitement. This is where discipline becomes gentle rather than forceful. You continue because you value the practice, not because it feels good. Trusting time also changes your relationship with effort. You stop overexerting, you stop pushing for results, you settle into a sustainable rhythm. This rhythm protects you from burnout. There is wisdom in recognizing that some growth cannot be rushed without breaking something. Forcing insight often leads to confusion. Allowing time creates integration. Time also reveals what is truly aligned. What is not meant for you often falls away when it does not deepen over time. What remains quietly strengthens. Another aspect of trusting time is learning to sit with doubt without acting on it. Doubt will arise, especially when nothing seems to change. You do not suppress it. You do not obey it. You let it be present while you continue. This teaches you that doubt is not a signal to stop. It is a signal to stay attentive. Doubt does not disappear with answers. It softens with experience. Trusting time also builds humility. You accept that you do not control the pace of transformation. You cooperate with it. This humility reduces frustration. In Buddhism, patience is not passive waiting. It is active endurance with awareness. You are present. You are engaged. You are not numbing out. You are allowing time to do its work. Invisible progress also strengthens faith in practice itself. Not faith in outcomes, but faith in process. You trust that showing up matters even when you cannot see how. This trust spills into other areas of life. You become less reactive to slow results, less desperate for immediate validation. You allow projects, relationships, and healing to unfold. Over time, you may look back and realize that something fundamental has shifted. Not suddenly, quietly. You respond differently. You relate differently. The change was happening all along. This realization often comes as a surprise. You did not feel it while it was happening. You only notice when you compare how you are now to how you were before. This is the nature of slow change. Trusting time also teaches compassion for others. You stop expecting quick change from them. You understand that growth has its own pace. There is relief in releasing the demand for visible progress. You stop measuring yourself constantly. You live more fully in the present. Time becomes an ally rather than an enemy. You stop fighting it. You move with it. This does not mean you never adjust course. It means you do not abandon yourself just because change is quiet. Trust here is deep. It does not need proof. It does not rush. It stays. And as this trust matures, you realize something important. You are not behind. You are not failing. You are growing in ways that cannot yet be seen. Time is working even when it feels still. As time stretches and progress remains quiet, another expectation quietly reveals itself. The expectation that before you move, everything inside you must agree. That fear must calm down. That doubt must disappear. That resistance must soften. Only then, you tell yourself, will it be safe to act. This belief feels reasonable, but it keeps many people standing still long after the moment to move has arrived. There is a deep emotional longing for inner harmony. We want a clear yes inside, a feeling of alignment, a sense that all parts of us are on board. When that does not happen, we assume it is a sign to wait. But Buddhist understanding gently challenges this assumption. It shows that inner consensus is rare, temporary, and often unnecessary. Human experience is not a committee that votes unanimously. It is a collection of voices, impulses, memories, fears, and hopes. Some parts want safety, some want growth, some want rest, some want movement. Waiting for all of them to agree before acting often means waiting forever. Acting without internal consensus is not about ignoring yourself. It is about understanding yourself more honestly. You recognize that fear can be present without being in charge. That doubt can speak without having the final word. That resistance can exist without stopping movement. Buddhist practice recognizes that the mind is not a single voice. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions fluctuate. Sensations change. If you wait for a permanent internal state before acting, you will be waiting for something that does not exist. Trust in this context is the willingness to move forward while parts of you protest. Not violently, not forcefully, but steadily. You acknowledge the fear. You feel the doubt. You notice the resistance, and you act anyway, guided by values rather than comfort. This is a difficult practice because it goes against the belief that peace must come before action. Buddhism suggests the opposite is often true. Peace sometimes follows action, not immediately, but gradually, as the nervous system learns that movement did not destroy you. Fear often speaks the loudest just before growth. It is not a signal that something is wrong. It is a signal that something unfamiliar is happening. When you treat fear as a stop sign, your world shrinks. When you treat it as information, your world expands. Acting without internal consensus requires discernment. You are not suppressing inner voices. You are listening without obeying all of them. You differentiate between voices that protect and voices that paralyze. This takes practice. One way this practice develops is by identifying what truly guides you. Not what feels easiest, but what matters. Values provide direction when emotions are divided. You may feel afraid and still choose honesty. You may feel uncertain and still choose kindness. Values do not eliminate fear. They give you something to stand on. Many people confuse discomfort with misalignment. They assume that if something feels uncomfortable, it must be wrong. But growth often feels uncomfortable because it disrupts familiarity. Acting without internal consensus helps you distinguish between discomfort that signals harm and discomfort that signals expansion. This practice also changes how you relate to doubt. Doubt is often treated as an enemy, something to overcome. Buddhism treats doubt as a natural part of inquiry. It becomes problematic only when it becomes a reason to freeze. When you act with doubt present, you learn something important. Doubt does not vanish when you wait. It often grows. Action, even imperfect action, provides new information that quiets doubt more effectively than thinking ever could. Resistance is another inner voice that often demands obedience. Resistance usually wants to preserve the current state. It is not evil, it is conservative. It fears loss. When you understand this, you stop arguing with resistance. You acknowledge it and move forward gently. Acting without internal consensus does not mean pushing yourself beyond capacity. It means choosing movement that respects your limits while still challenging them. Small steps count. You do not need to overwhelm yourself to practice trust. This approach also reduces procrastination. Procrastination is often a strategy to avoid internal conflict. If you delay, you do not have to confront fear or doubt. Acting despite conflict breaks this pattern. You learn that you can function even when things inside feel messy. Buddhist teachings often emphasize right effort. Right effort is not forcing harmony. It is sustaining movement with care. You act, you observe, you adjust. You do not demand emotional perfection. This practice also deepens compassion for yourself. You stop shaming yourself for feeling conflicted. You accept that complexity is part of being human. This acceptance reduces inner violence. When you act without internal consensus, you also stop over-identifying with emotions. You realize that emotions are weather, not commands. They pass. You remain. This realization builds confidence. Not the confidence that you will feel good, but the confidence that you can act even when you do not. This is a powerful form of trust. Many people wait for motivation before acting. Motivation is unreliable, it comes and goes. Acting without internal consensus teaches you to rely on commitment instead. Commitment is quieter, steadier, and less dependent on mood. This shift changes how you experience responsibility. You stop blaming your inaction on how you feel. You take ownership of your choices. This ownership is empowering, not burdensome. There is also freedom in letting go of the fantasy of inner alignment. You stop trying to fix yourself before living. You accept that life is lived amid tension, not after it resolves. This practice also makes you more tolerant of others. You understand that people often act while conflicted. You stop expecting perfect clarity from them. You offer patience. Acting without internal consensus also reduces fear of regret. When you know that fear and doubt were present, you do not later blame yourself for not feeling sure. You acted with honesty. That matters. Buddhism does not promise that acting through inner conflict will always feel good. It promises that it will be honest. Honesty builds integrity. Integrity builds trust. Over time, you may notice that inner harmony appears more often after you act, not because you forced it, but because the system settles once it sees that action is survivable. This does not mean conflict disappears forever. It means you stop needing its absence as a condition for living. Acting without internal consensus also aligns with trusting time. You do not wait for a future version of yourself. You act as you are. This practice is especially important when progress is invisible. You continue even when doubt questions the point. You trust that movement itself is meaningful. As you continue walking this way, trust becomes less about how you feel and more about what you do. You trust your capacity to act with care, even when the inner landscape is unsettled. Eventually, something shifts. You no longer expect your inner world to be calm before you live. You live and allow calm to come and go. This does not make life easier. It makes it real. You stop postponing your life until conditions are perfect. You meet life where you are, and in doing so, you discover a deeper trust. Not trust that fear will disappear, but trust that fear does not have to disappear for you to move forward. As you learn to move forward without inner agreement, another confusion quietly surfaces. You begin to loosen your grip. You stop forcing certainty. You stop trying to control every internal state. And then a new question appears, subtle but important. If I am not controlling, am I giving up? If I am not pushing, am I becoming passive? This is where many people misunderstand trust and unknowingly slide into stagnation. There is a thin emotional line between surrender and resignation, and from the outside, they can look the same. Both involve letting go. Both involve acceptance. But inside, they are completely different experiences. One is alive, the other is numb. One is rooted in trust, the other is rooted in defeat. Surrender, in the Buddhist sense, does not mean stopping engagement. It means releasing the illusion of control while remaining fully present. Resignation, on the other hand, is the collapse of agency. It is the moment you stop believing your actions matter. When trust is confused with passivity, movement slows, curiosity fades, and life becomes something that happens to you rather than something you participate in. Many people arrive at resignation unintentionally. They hear teachings about letting go and misinterpret them as instructions to stop trying. They confuse non-attachment with indifference. They tell themselves that effort is ego, that desire is wrong, that action is forcing. Over time, this misunderstanding drains vitality. Buddhist trust does not ask you to stop acting. It asks you to stop clinging to outcomes. There is a difference. You still show up, you still respond, you still make choices, but you no longer demand that life follow your script. Control is often driven by fear, fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of being wrong. When you try to control life, you are trying to reduce fear by narrowing possibilities. But this narrowing comes at a cost. You lose flexibility, you lose responsiveness, you become rigid. Non-control is not the absence of action, it is the absence of force. You act without gripping, you choose without insisting, you move without trying to dominate the process. This allows life to meet you halfway. Resignation feels heavy, the body slumps, the breath is shallow. There is a sense of giving up, even if you tell yourself you are being spiritual. Surrender feels open. The body remains upright. The breath is steady. There is energy available, even in difficulty. Learning to tell the difference requires honesty. You have to ask yourself what your letting go actually feels like. Does it bring clarity or dullness? Does it create space or numbness? Does it invite engagement or withdrawal? Trust as non-control means accepting that you cannot manage every variable while still honoring your role in the unfolding. You stop trying to guarantee outcomes, but you do not stop caring. Care remains central. This distinction matters because resignation often hides behind wisdom language. People say things like "it is what it is" or "there is nothing I can do," when what they really mean is "I am afraid to try again." Buddhism does not encourage this collapse. It encourages courage without control. Surrender is an active state. It requires attention. You stay aware of what is happening. You adjust your response as conditions change. You are involved, but not attached. Resignation is passive. Attention drifts. You stop checking in. You stop responding. You assume nothing will change, so why bother? One of the reasons people slide into resignation is exhaustion. After trying to control everything for so long, letting go can feel like relief. But relief is not the same as trust. Relief fades. Trust steadies. Buddhist practice supports surrender by strengthening presence. When you are present, you are not passive. You are awake. You notice what is needed. You respond appropriately. Presence keeps surrender from becoming resignation. Non-control also requires humility. You admit that you do not know how things will unfold. But humility does not mean helplessness. It means cooperation. You work with conditions rather than against them. This approach changes how you experience effort. Effort becomes lighter. You stop overexerting. You stop pushing beyond what is skillful. You apply energy where it matters, and you rest where it does not. Resignation often comes with bitterness, a sense that life has disappointed you. Surrender does not carry bitterness. It carries acceptance without collapse. When trust is misunderstood as passivity, stagnation follows. You stop exploring, you stop learning, you stop refining. Life becomes repetitive. This is not peace, it is withdrawal. Buddhist trust encourages continual engagement. The practice never ends. You keep observing, you keep adjusting, you keep responding. Letting go of control does not mean letting go of responsibility. Responsibility in this sense means responsibility, the ability to respond to what is here. You do not respond by forcing outcomes. You respond by aligning with reality. This is especially important when things are difficult. When circumstances do not change, resignation says nothing matters. Surrender says this is what is happening, how will I meet it? The difference shows up in small moments. When something goes wrong, resignation sighs and shuts down. Surrender pauses, breathes, and chooses the next appropriate action. Trust as non-control also changes how you relate to desire. Desire is often seen as the enemy in spiritual practice. But Buddhism does not ask you to eliminate desire. It asks you to understand it. Desire becomes problematic when it turns into clinging. You can want change without demanding it. You can hope without insisting. You can act without gripping. This balance keeps desire from hardening into control. Resignation often masquerades as acceptance, but acceptance without engagement is incomplete. True acceptance includes response. Non-control also protects you from burnout. When you stop trying to manage everything, energy returns. You stop fighting reality. This frees resources for wise action. Many people fear that if they stop controlling, things will fall apart. Buddhism offers a different perspective. Things are already changing. Control only creates the illusion of stability. Surrender allows you to move with change rather than resist it. This movement keeps you alive and responsive. Trust as non-control also deepens compassion. When you stop trying to control others, you listen more. You respect autonomy. You allow people to be who they are. Resignation, on the other hand, often leads to disengagement from others. You stop caring because caring feels futile. Surrender keeps care alive without attachment. You care deeply without trying to manage outcomes. This distinction is crucial in long-term challenges. When change is slow or impossible, resignation numbs. Surrender adapts. You find new ways to relate, new ways to respond. Buddhist teachings emphasize the middle way. Not forcing, not collapsing. Engaged non-control sits in this middle. This way requires practice. You will sometimes mistake resignation for surrender. The body will tell you, pay attention to energy, to aliveness, to presence. Trust is not about letting life roll over you. It is about standing upright without trying to dominate. As you continue walking this path, you realize that non-control does not mean doing nothing. It means doing what is appropriate without insisting it work a certain way. This frees you from the emotional roller coaster of success and failure. You act because it is right to act, not because you need a specific result. Stagnation dissolves when surrender is understood correctly. Movement returns, curiosity returns, engagement returns. Trust matures here. It is no longer confused with passivity. It becomes a dynamic relationship with life. You stop forcing, you stop giving up, you participate, and in that participation you discover something important. Letting go of control does not shrink your life, it opens it. As control loosens without collapsing into passivity, trust moves into a more delicate territory. It is no longer just about how you relate to uncertainty or effort. It begins to affect how you relate to people. Choices become clearer internally, but externally they create friction. Expectations surface, roles tighten, disappointment appears in faces you care about. This is where trust becomes relational, and where many people quietly abandon themselves to keep peace. There is a deep emotional charge around disappointing others. For many, it feels dangerous. It threatens belonging, approval, identity. From a young age, love is often tied to compliance. You learn who you are allowed to be by watching who smiles and who withdraws. Over time, expectations harden into invisible contracts. You play your part, and in return, you are accepted. Trusting your path disrupts these contracts, not out of rebellion, but out of honesty. And honesty, when it shifts behavior, almost always disappoints someone. This is where confusion arises. People assume that trust should make life smoother, not more uncomfortable. They believe that if something is right, it should feel harmonious with everyone. Buddhism does not promise this. It recognizes that alignment with truth often creates tension before it creates peace. Trust sometimes asks you to step out of a role that others depend on. The reliable one, the agreeable one, the caretaker, the achiever, the one who never says no. When you change, others may feel destabilized. They may accuse you of being selfish, cold, or ungrateful. This reaction is painful, but it does not automatically mean you are wrong. Buddhist ethics approach this terrain with nuance. They are not rigid rules. They are principles designed to reduce suffering while acknowledging complexity. One of the core principles is intention. Why you act matters as much as what you do. Trusting your path does not mean disregarding others. It means acting from sincerity rather than fear. You examine your intention carefully. Are you choosing this to avoid responsibility or to honor truth? Are you acting from resentment or from clarity? This examination keeps trust from becoming self-centered. Disappointment becomes harmful when it is caused by indifference. It becomes unavoidable when it is caused by integrity. Buddhism makes this distinction clear. You are responsible for how you act, not for how others feel about your honesty. This does not mean you act without care. Care is central. You speak truthfully but gently. You acknowledge impact without surrendering direction. You remain open to dialogue without negotiating your core. Relational tension is not a sign of failure. It is often a sign that something real is happening. When you stop performing expected roles, relationships must renegotiate themselves. Some adapt, some do not. This is painful, but it is also clarifying. Many people stay trapped in lives that no longer fit because they fear disappointing others more than disappointing themselves. Over time, this creates resentment. Resentment poisons relationships far more quietly and destructively than honest disappointment ever could. Buddhist trust encourages non-harm, but non-harm does not mean never causing discomfort. It means not acting with cruelty, manipulation, or disregard. Discomfort caused by truth is different from harm caused by avoidance. There is also an important teaching about attachment here. When others are attached to who you used to be, your change feels like loss to them. Their disappointment is real. You do not dismiss it, but you also do not sacrifice your path to manage their attachment. Compassion in this context means seeing their pain without absorbing responsibility for it. You allow them to feel what they feel without trying to fix it by betraying yourself. This is one of the hardest practices. The nervous system wants relief. Relief often comes from giving in, saying yes when you mean no, staying when you are done, shrinking to fit. Buddhism recognizes this impulse and gently challenges it. Trust asks you to tolerate relational discomfort without turning against yourself. You breathe, you listen, you speak honestly. You do not rush to repair by self-erasure. This practice also reveals the difference between harmony and peace. Harmony is agreement. Peace is integrity. Sometimes you must choose peace over harmony, knowing harmony may return later in a deeper form. Buddhist ethics emphasize right speech. Right speech includes truth, but also timing and tone. You do not weaponize honesty. You do not dramatize. You do not explain excessively to seek approval. You speak simply and clearly. Over-explaining is often a sign of guilt. You try to justify your path so others will accept it. But trust does not require permission. Excessive explanation can dilute clarity and invite negotiation where none is needed. Another subtle challenge is guilt. Guilt arises when you believe you are responsible for others' disappointment. Buddhism distinguishes guilt from remorse. Remorse acknowledges impact and motivates care. Guilt collapses the self and leads to compliance. Trust allows remorse without guilt. You can regret causing pain without believing you are wrong for being honest. This balance preserves dignity. Disappointing others also tests your boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are clarity about what you will and will not do. Trust strengthens boundaries because you are no longer shaping yourself around expectations. When boundaries are new, others may push against them. This is normal. They are adjusting. Trust means holding steady without aggression. Some relationships will deepen through this process. When people see that your choices are consistent and sincere, trust grows. Others may fall away. This loss hurts, but it also reveals which connections were dependent on performance. Buddhist teachings accept impermanence in relationships. Not all bonds are meant to last forever. Trusting this reduces clinging and bitterness. There is also a teaching about role suffering. Many people suffer not because of what they do, but because of who they believe they must be. When you step out of a role, suffering surfaces before it dissolves, both for you and for others. Trust means staying present through this transition. You do not rush to redefine yourself for others. You allow the dust to settle. Disappointing others also invites humility. You may realize that some of their feedback is valid. Trust does not mean stubbornness. You listen, you reflect, you adjust where appropriate, but you do not abandon your core direction. This balance is subtle. It requires ongoing attention. Buddhist practice supports this through mindfulness and ethical reflection. You check in regularly. Is this action reducing suffering overall? Is it aligned with care? Trust also asks you to accept that you cannot be fully understood by everyone. Some people will interpret your choices through their own fears. You let that be. Letting others be disappointed does not mean you stop loving them. Love does not require agreement. It requires honesty and respect. Over time, this practice strengthens self-respect. You become someone you can stand behind. This self-respect is felt by others, even if they resist it at first. Trusting your path in relationships is one of the most courageous acts. It risks misunderstanding, it risks loss, but it also makes genuine connection possible, because connection built on performance is fragile. Connection built on truth is resilient. Buddhist trust does not promise relational ease, it promises integrity. Integrity reduces long-term suffering, even when it creates short-term discomfort. As you continue walking, you realize that disappointing others does not mean betraying them. It means refusing to betray yourself. And from that place, something stabilizes. You stand more upright, you speak more clearly, you relate more honestly. Trust matures here. It is no longer just internal, it is lived in relationship. And while not everyone will stay, the ones who do will meet you as you are, not as who you were pretending to be. After you learn that trust may disappoint others, something inside you becomes quieter. You stop performing as much. You stop negotiating your path for approval. You start living with more honesty, and in that honesty, a new emptiness is revealed. Not a bad emptiness, but a space where you used to reach outward, a space where you used to look for signs, for proof, for a signal from life that you are doing the right thing. Without those signals, the ordinary moment can feel too plain, almost suspicious. This is where trust becomes even more subtle, because it asks you to stop searching and start resting. Most people do not struggle because they lack meaning. They struggle because they believe meaning must arrive in special packaging, a perfect sign, a coincidence that feels magical, a clear confirmation, a moment that tells them, yes, you are on track. When these moments do not appear, they feel lost. When they do appear, they feel briefly relieved, and then the hunger returns. The mind keeps reaching for the next sign. Buddhist trust does not reject the beauty of meaningful moments, but it refuses to make peace dependent on them. It teaches that the present moment is sufficient, not because it is perfect, but because it is what is real. And reality does not need permission to be complete. Trusting the ordinary moment means releasing the habit of treating life like a puzzle you must solve. It means letting go of the need for external confirmation and learning to meet what is here without asking it to be more dramatic, more inspiring, more obvious. This is difficult because the mind is addicted to stimulation. It wants novelty. It wants emotional peaks. It wants certainty delivered in a way that feels undeniable. Ordinary moments do not provide this. They provide something else. Quiet truth, breath, sensation, light on a wall, the sound of a distant car, the steady existence of your own body. These things are not exciting, but they are stable. When you treat the ordinary moment as insufficient, you create a constant restlessness. You are always waiting for life to become meaningful, instead of noticing that meaning is already present in the texture of experience. Buddhism calls this craving. Craving is not only about wanting objects, it is about wanting the present to be different. The search for signs is often a refined form of craving. You want reassurance, but you want it to feel spiritual, special, destined. So you look for patterns. You interpret coincidences. You watch for synchronicities. When you find them, you feel chosen. When you do not, you feel abandoned. This makes your peace dependent on a kind of cosmic approval system. Buddhist trust steps out of that system. It does not ask the universe to confirm your choices. It asks you to practice awareness and see what reduces suffering. That is the confirmation, not a sign in the sky, but the quiet effect of wise attention. This does not mean you become cold or cynical. It means you stop using signs as emotional crutches. You stop treating ordinary silence as failure. Silence is not rejection, it is simply silence. Treating the present moment as already complete does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means recognizing that completeness is not the same as pleasure. A moment can be complete and still contain sadness, fatigue, uncertainty, or grief. Completion means nothing is missing from what is actually here. It is whole because it is real. Many people confuse completion with happiness. They think if a moment is complete, it should feel good. But a storm is complete. A winter day is complete. A hard conversation is complete. Completion is about reality being fully itself. When you trust the ordinary moment, you stop postponing peace. You stop saying, "I will feel okay when I get a sign." When things become clearer, when life becomes more exciting. You allow peace to be something that arises from presence, not from circumstances. This practice begins with noticing how often you leave the present, not physically, but mentally. Checking for messages, refreshing feeds, replaying conversations, looking ahead to the next event. This constant movement is the mind trying to escape ordinariness. The mind treats stillness as emptiness, and emptiness as danger. Buddhist practice teaches you to stay, to let the moment be simple, to feel the body breathing, to notice the urge to seek stimulation and not obey it immediately. This is not about discipline for its own sake. It is about reclaiming your capacity to be with life as it is. When you stop seeking signs, you also stop turning life into a test where you pass if you help the right coincidence appear, and fail if nothing special happens. This test is exhausting. It keeps you on edge. Trust ends the test. It says this moment is not trying to prove anything. The ordinary moment is where real life happens, not in highlights, not in dramatic turning points. Most of life is breakfast, walking, waiting, cleaning, working, breathing, listening. If you cannot trust these moments, you cannot trust life, because life is mostly this. There is a hidden sadness in the constant search for confirmation. It implies that what is here is not enough, that your own experience is not trustworthy, that you need something outside you to legitimize being alive. Buddhist trust challenges this. It says your awareness is enough. This breath is enough. This moment is enough to begin. This does not mean you do not pursue goals or growth. It means you stop using goals as an escape from the present. You work toward the future while respecting the present as the only place you can actually live. Trusting the ordinary moment also reduces superstition. When you rely on signs, you may begin to shape decisions around random events. You start reading meaning into things that may not be meaningful. This creates confusion. Buddhism values clarity. It encourages you to base choices on ethical reflection, awareness, and direct observation, not on wishful interpretation. Synchronicities can be pleasant, but they are not a foundation. They come and go. When you treat them as essential, you become dependent. Dependence creates fear. You fear the moment life stops feeling magical. You fear that the absence of signs means you are lost. Trust says the absence of signs is normal. It does not mean you are off track. It means you are in an ordinary moment. And an ordinary moment is not a problem. It is the ground. There is also a deep freedom in letting the moment be ordinary. You stop chasing spiritual highs. You stop trying to manufacture meaning. You let life be simple. Simplicity brings a quiet joy that is not dependent on excitement. This joy is often overlooked because it is subtle. It feels like ease, like being okay without a reason, like a soft exhale. It is not intense, but it is stable. Buddhism sees this stability as a form of peace. Trusting the present moment as complete also changes your relationship with time. You stop rushing. You stop treating now as merely a bridge to later. You respect now as life itself. This respect is transformative. You begin to listen more carefully. You notice details. You become more responsive. You are not living in anticipation. You are living. There is also an ethical dimension here. When you stop seeking signs for yourself, you become more available to the reality of others. You stop using the world as a mirror for your personal story. You see people more clearly. You notice suffering and kindness in ordinary interactions. This grounds compassion. Buddhism teaches that awakening is not found in special experiences. It is found in seeing clearly. Seeing clearly requires staying close to ordinary reality. When you chase the extraordinary, you miss what is in front of you. Trusting the ordinary moment also reduces fear of boredom. Boredom is often the mind's protest against simplicity. It says, "This is not enough." But when you stay with boredom, it often reveals deeper feelings: restlessness, loneliness, unprocessed grief. Signs and stimulation often mask these feelings. Ordinary moments bring them into view. This is not a punishment, it is an opportunity. When you stop escaping into signs, you meet what has been waiting to be felt. This meeting is part of trust. Over time, you may notice that the world becomes more vivid. Not because it becomes more dramatic, but because you are actually here. Colors appear more clearly, sounds become richer. Small moments carry more presence. You stop needing fireworks to feel alive. This does not mean you will never enjoy meaningful coincidences or moments of deep resonance. It means you do not depend on them. You appreciate them without clinging. You let them pass without feeling abandoned. Trusting the present moment as sufficient also means trusting that life does not owe you constant confirmation. You stop demanding that existence reassure you. You live without needing to be constantly affirmed. This is mature trust. It is quiet. It is steady. It does not beg the future to prove itself. It does not require signs to keep going. It rests in what is. And when you truly begin to live this way, something surprising happens. The ordinary moment stops feeling ordinary. Not because it becomes extraordinary, but because you finally meet it fully. And in that meeting, you find what you were searching for all along, a sense of completion that does not depend on anything changing. When the ordinary moment no longer needs to prove itself, a deeper fear begins to surface. Without signs, without reassurance, without confirmation, something raw is exposed. A quiet thought rises from underneath everything else. What if no one is holding me? What if there is no safety net? What if I step forward and nothing catches me? This fear is not dramatic, it is primal, and it is one of the last places where trust is asked to grow. Most people carry an unspoken assumption that somewhere, somehow, support will appear. That if things fall apart, help will arrive. That effort will be met. That meaning will rescue them. This assumption is rarely examined until it starts to dissolve, and when it does, fear floods in. Not fear of failure, but fear of abandonment by life itself. Buddhism does not rush to soothe this fear. It does not promise that something will always catch you. It does not offer guarantees. Instead, it offers something quieter and more honest. The understanding that fear of being unsupported is part of being alive, and that courage is not the absence of this fear, but the willingness to walk with it. This fear often comes from early experiences, moments when support was inconsistent, when care was conditional, when safety depended on performance or obedience. The body remembers these moments even when the mind forgets. So when you face uncertainty now, the nervous system reacts as if history is repeating itself. It tells you that stepping forward without assurance is dangerous. Buddhist practice does not dismiss this reaction. It works with it slowly. It begins by acknowledging that fear is not irrational. It is protective. It wants to keep you safe. But it does not always know what safety actually is. Safety, as the mind defines it, often means certainty, control, and external support. Buddhism offers a different definition. Safety is not guaranteed outcomes. It is the ability to stay present with whatever arises. This is a radical shift. When you walk without knowing if you will be caught, you are not being reckless. You are facing the truth that life does not come with guarantees. Pretending otherwise creates constant tension. Accepting this truth is terrifying at first, but it also releases you from false expectations. The terror of being unsupported often shows up when you stop relying on old structures, old roles, old beliefs, old identities. As long as those structures are in place, you feel held. When you step away from them, the ground feels unstable. This is not because you are wrong. It is because you are no longer leaning on familiar supports. Buddhist teachings describe this as groundlessness, not as a problem, but as a reality. There is no permanent ground. Everything changes, everything moves. When you accept this, you stop searching for a place that will never shift. This acceptance does not remove fear. It changes your relationship with it. Fear becomes something you carry, not something you must eliminate before acting. Walking anyway means taking steps while fear is present, not pretending it is not there, not trying to conquer it, simply acknowledging it and moving with care. This practice is subtle. It does not look heroic. Often, it looks like making a small choice despite feeling shaky, speaking honestly even when your voice trembles, staying with a difficult moment without reaching for rescue. The mind often says, "I cannot do this unless I know I will be okay." Buddhism replies gently, "You cannot know that, but you can know how to breathe right now." Breath becomes an anchor here, not as a metaphor, but as a real support. When fear tells you nothing will catch you, the breath reminds you that something is happening. You are alive. You are here. This moment is holding you, even if the future is unknown. This does not mean the breath replaces external support. It means you stop demanding that the future prove itself before you live. You work with what is present. Fear of being unsupported is often amplified by comparison. You look at others who seem backed by family, money, confidence, or certainty. You assume they are held in ways you are not. This assumption deepens isolation. Buddhism encourages you to look more closely. Everyone is walking on shifting ground. Some hide it better, some distract themselves, but no one is exempt. This shared vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a point of connection. When you accept that no one is fully supported, you stop seeing yourself as uniquely unsafe. Fear becomes a human experience, not a personal defect. Walking anyway also means redefining what support looks like. Support does not always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it arrives as resilience, as adaptability, as the ability to recover after falling. Buddhism does not promise you will not fall. It teaches you how to fall without shattering. This is a different kind of safety. The terror of nothing catching you often comes from the belief that you cannot handle what comes next. This belief is rarely tested. When you act despite fear, you gather evidence that you are more capable than you thought. This evidence does not come all at once. It accumulates quietly, each time you survive uncertainty, each time you respond to difficulty, each time you stand back up. Over time, trust grows not because life became safer, but because you became steadier. Buddhist practice emphasizes this steadiness. It is built through repetition, through returning to awareness, through meeting discomfort without panic, through compassion toward fear instead of contempt. Fear softens when it is met with kindness, not indulgence, but understanding. You acknowledge why it is there. You do not obey it blindly. Walking anyway also involves grieving the fantasy of being fully supported. Many people carry a hidden hope that one day they will feel completely safe, completely held, completely certain. Letting go of this fantasy hurts, but it also frees you. When you stop waiting for total support, you stop postponing your life. You act as you are, not as you wish you were. Buddhist teachings often speak of refuge, but refuge is misunderstood. It is not a promise that nothing bad will happen. It is a practice of returning to awareness, ethics, and compassion when things do happen. Your refuge is not the future. It is your capacity to meet the present. This understanding changes how you relate to risk. Risk becomes unavoidable, not something to eliminate. You choose risks consciously rather than being paralyzed by them. Walking anyway does not mean ignoring practical considerations. You still plan, you still prepare, but you do not wait for emotional certainty before acting. Fear may never fully leave, but it no longer dictates your choices. Another aspect of this practice is letting go of the belief that support must look a certain way. Sometimes support arrives after the step, not before it. Sometimes it arrives internally, not externally. Sometimes it arrives as learning rather than comfort. When you demand support in advance, you close yourself to these forms. Walking anyway keeps you open. There is also a humility here. You admit that you do not know how things will unfold. You stop pretending to have control. This humility is not weakness, it is honesty. Honesty creates trust. You trust yourself because you are not lying to yourself about guarantees. Over time, fear becomes less dramatic. It still appears, but it does not dominate. You recognize it as a companion, not a commander. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means you stop expecting it to be. Buddhism does not offer a safety net. It offers training in awareness, training in compassion, training in responding wisely. This training is what catches you, not by preventing falls, but by teaching you how to land. As you continue walking without assurance, you discover something quietly profound. You are already doing what you feared you could not do. You are moving forward without being fully supported, and you are still here. This realization does not eliminate fear. It changes your relationship with it. Fear becomes something you can carry without stopping. Trust matures here. It is no longer hope that someone will catch you. It is confidence that you can walk even if no one does. And in that confidence, you find a deeper kind of support. Not promised, not guaranteed, but lived step by step, breath by breath, exactly as you are. After walking without guarantees, after learning that nothing may catch you and still moving forward, a strange inner state often appears. Not fear, not certainty either. Something softer and more unsettling. Confusion. Thoughts no longer line up. Old explanations stop working. Direction feels blurred. The mind asks, did I miss something? Did I take a wrong turn? Am I falling behind? This is the moment where many people turn back. But this is not a detour. This is the path showing itself in a different form. Confusion has a bad reputation. It is treated as a mistake, a delay, a sign that something has gone wrong. People assume wisdom should feel clear, focused, confident. When confusion appears, they believe they have failed or regressed. Buddhism offers a radically different understanding. Confusion is not the opposite of wisdom, it is often its doorway. Confusion appears when old maps dissolve and new ones have not yet formed. It arises when familiar frameworks can no longer contain your experience. This is not collapse, it is transition. But because transition lacks structure, the mind panics. It wants something solid to hold. When it cannot find it, it assumes danger. Buddhist teachings recognize confusion as a natural phase of learning, not intellectual learning, but lived understanding. When insight deepens, it often destabilizes what you thought you knew. Certainty cracks, identity loosens, direction becomes unclear. This disorientation is not a mistake. It is evidence that something real is shifting. Many people try to escape confusion as quickly as possible. They look for answers. They adopt new beliefs. They cling to old roles. They distract themselves, anything to regain a sense of orientation. But in doing so, they often interrupt a process that needs time. Trusting confusion means allowing yourself to not know without interpreting that as failure. It means staying present in the fog without demanding immediate clarity. This is difficult because confusion threatens the ego. The ego wants to appear competent, certain, in control. Confusion exposes vulnerability, but wisdom does not grow in perfectly organized spaces. It grows where assumptions are questioned, where answers fall apart, where you no longer know how to explain yourself. Buddhism does not rush to fix this. It encourages you to stay. Confusion also arises when you outgrow a stage of understanding. What once made sense no longer does. The mind tries to reuse old explanations, but they feel hollow. This creates discomfort. But it is not regression, it is maturation. Think of confusion as compost. Old ideas break down so something new can grow. This breakdown is messy. It smells unpleasant. It does not look productive. But without it, growth is shallow. One reason confusion feels unbearable is because we associate it with incompetence. We think not knowing means we are behind. But confusion often means you are ahead of your old understanding. You have stepped beyond what you can currently articulate. Buddhist practice teaches patience here, not passive patience, but attentive patience. You continue practicing, you continue observing, you continue responding to life ethically, even when you do not understand where it is leading. Confusion is often the mind catching up to experience. You may have already changed internally, but your concepts lag behind. The mind wants to label, categorize, explain. When it cannot, it spins. Trust asks you to let experience lead and let concepts follow later. This is especially important because forcing clarity too soon often leads to false certainty. You may adopt explanations that feel comforting but are not true. These explanations temporarily reduce confusion but limit growth. Trusting confusion means resisting the urge to prematurely resolve it. You allow questions to remain open. You do not demand answers on a deadline. Buddhism emphasizes not knowing as a practice. Not knowing is not ignorance. It is openness. It is the willingness to stay curious without closing down inquiry. This openness is fertile ground for insight. When confusion arises, the nervous system often reacts with anxiety. The body tightens, thoughts race. You may feel pressure to fix something. Trust involves recognizing this reaction and not letting it dictate your behavior. You breathe. You ground yourself. You remind yourself that confusion is not dangerous. It is uncomfortable, but discomfort is not harm. Confusion also changes how you relate to others. You may feel less articulate, less certain. This can trigger shame. You may withdraw or overcompensate. Trust asks you to allow yourself to be seen as you are, even when you do not have answers. This vulnerability deepens authenticity. You stop pretending to know what you do not. You listen more. You speak more carefully. Relationships shift from performance to presence. Buddhist ethics support this humility. You do not need to present yourself as enlightened or confident. You need to be honest and kind. Confusion also teaches discernment. You begin to notice which teachings, habits, or beliefs no longer serve you. You stop forcing them to fit. This letting go creates space, but space can feel empty before it feels alive. Many people mistake this emptiness for loss. They believe they are losing something essential. In reality, they are shedding what no longer fits. This shedding can feel like grief. Grief is often part of confusion. Grief for old identities, old certainties, old dreams. Trust means allowing this grief without rushing to replace what was lost. Buddhism does not see grief as an obstacle. It sees it as part of love and change. Allowing grief to move through you clears the way for deeper understanding. Another reason confusion feels threatening is because it disrupts planning. You do not know what comes next. The future feels vague. This triggers fear of stagnation. Trust reminds you that not knowing the next step does not mean you are stuck. You can continue doing what is right in front of you. You can keep practicing kindness, attention, and care. Direction will clarify through action, not through thinking alone. Confusion often narrows attention inward. You analyze yourself constantly. Trust invites you to return to the present moment. What is needed now? What is being asked of you right here? Often, the answer is simple. Rest, listen, respond, continue. Buddhist teachings emphasize that wisdom is not a straight line, it spirals. You revisit themes at deeper levels. Confusion may revisit you, but it does not mean you are back where you started. You are encountering familiar questions from a new place. This understanding reduces panic. You stop labeling confusion as regression. You recognize it as part of deepening. Trusting confusion also builds resilience. You learn that you can function without clarity. You can live, care, and act ethically, even when your internal narrative is unsettled. This resilience is essential because life will offer confusion again and again. Each time something meaningful shifts, confusion follows. Expecting permanent clarity sets you up for disappointment. Buddhism does not aim for permanent clarity. It aims for freedom from clinging to clarity. When you stop clinging, confusion loses its threat. It becomes information, a signal that something is changing. Confusion also sharpens attention. You stop operating on autopilot. You question assumptions. You listen more closely. This attentiveness is fertile ground for insight. Trusting confusion does not mean wallowing in it. It means staying engaged without demanding resolution. You continue learning, you continue practicing, you continue relating. Over time, clarity often returns, but it is different, less rigid, less absolute, more spacious. You understand without needing to explain everything. And when clarity returns, you may realize something surprising. Confusion taught you more than certainty ever did. It humbled you, it opened you, it slowed you down enough to see. This realization changes your relationship with future confusion. You are less afraid of it. You recognize it as a familiar companion on the path. Trust matures here. It is no longer shaken by not knowing. It does not interpret confusion as failure. You stop asking what went wrong and start asking what is unfolding. And in that shift, confusion transforms. It is no longer a detour. It is part of the terrain. You keep walking. Not because you understand, but because you trust that understanding will arrive when it is ready. And until then, you are allowed to be exactly where you are. As confusion softens and stops being treated like a mistake, another need quietly loosens its grip. The need to explain yourself. The need to know who you are becoming. The need to picture a future version of yourself that makes all this uncertainty feel justified. When that picture fades, something tender is exposed. A humility that feels both freeing and unsettling. The humility of not knowing who you will be on the other side. Most people carry an unspoken belief that transformation should come with a clear destination. That if you are changing, you should know into what. That growth should move toward a recognizable identity, a better version, a healed version, a wiser version. When you cannot name that version, anxiety appears. The mind asks, what am I doing all this for if I don't know who I'm becoming? Buddhist trust gently removes this demand. It does not offer a replacement identity. It does not promise a final form. It invites you to let transformation happen without needing a narrative to hold it together. This is deeply uncomfortable because identity provides orientation. It tells you how to act, how to explain yourself, how to belong. When identity loosens, you may feel exposed. You may feel less impressive, less certain, less definable. This can feel like loss, even when something new is forming. The humility of not knowing what you're becoming is not weakness. It is honesty. It acknowledges that life is not a self-improvement project with a fixed endpoint. It is a living process. And living processes do not announce their final shape in advance. Buddhism understands transformation as ongoing and unpredictable. You are not moving toward a static ideal. You are responding to conditions as they arise. Who you become depends on encounters, losses, insights, relationships, and time. Trying to predefine the outcome often limits what is possible. The mind wants a story, a before and after, a clear arc. Stories create comfort because they organize experience. But when you cling to a story about who you will be, you begin shaping your choices to fit that image. You may ignore unexpected invitations because they don't match the narrative. You may resist changes that don't look like progress. Trusting transformation without a narrative means allowing yourself to be surprised by who you become. It means accepting that growth may not look admirable or coherent from the outside. It may look messy. It may involve detours you did not plan. It may take you away from identities that once felt important. This humility also dismantles comparison. When you don't know who you're becoming, you stop measuring yourself against others' outcomes. You stop asking whether you are ahead or behind. You recognize that everyone's transformation unfolds differently, shaped by unique conditions. Many people struggle with this because they believe they need to justify their uncertainty. They feel pressure to explain what they are doing with their lives. When they cannot, they feel inadequate. Buddhist trust loosens this pressure. It allows you to say, "I don't know yet," and not treat that as failure. This not knowing creates space for learning, space for listening, space for responding more accurately to the present rather than to an imagined future. There is also an ethical dimension here. When you do not cling to a fixed idea of who you are becoming, you are more open to feedback. You can admit mistakes. You can change course. You are less defensive. Identity rigidity often blocks growth because it must be protected. Humility keeps growth fluid. You remain teachable. You do not assume you have arrived. You do not cling to spiritual achievements or self-concepts. Buddhism warns against this kind of clinging. Even wisdom can become an obstacle if you identify with it too strongly. Not knowing what you're becoming also softens fear of failure. Failure is only devastating when you believe you were supposed to become something specific. When you release that expectation, failure becomes part of exploration rather than a verdict. This does not mean you stop caring about direction. It means direction becomes value-based rather than identity-based. You move toward kindness, clarity, and care without needing to know what kind of person that will make you. Buddhist practice emphasizes intention rather than outcome. You act with sincerity. You attend carefully. You respond ethically. Who you become emerges from this way of living, not from a plan. There is grief here too. Grief for the identities you thought you would inhabit, the versions of yourself you imagined. Letting go of these images can feel like losing a future you had invested in. Trust means allowing this grief without rushing to replace the image. This grief often goes unrecognized because it is subtle, but honoring it is important. You are releasing a form of certainty. That matters. The humility of not knowing also protects you from arrogance. You do not assume your current understanding is final. You remain open to correction. This openness deepens wisdom over time. It also deepens compassion. When you accept your own becoming as uncertain, you are less likely to judge others for being unfinished. You recognize that everyone is in process. This recognition softens relationships. Not knowing who you're becoming also changes how you relate to time. You stop treating the present as a waiting room for your future self. You live more fully now, without postponing worth or peace until you arrive somewhere else. Many people believe they must become someone else before they deserve rest, love, or respect. Buddhism challenges this. You do not need to earn your humanity through transformation. You are allowed to be incomplete. Trusting transformation without a narrative also frees you from performance. You are not trying to live up to an image. You are responding to what is needed. This makes life more honest and less exhausting. There is also a paradox here. When you stop trying to become someone specific, change often happens more naturally. Effort becomes aligned rather than forced. Growth emerges from engagement, not from self-monitoring. The mind may protest. It may ask, but how will I know if I'm doing it right? Buddhism offers a simple answer. Notice suffering. Notice its reduction. Notice whether your actions lead to more clarity or more confusion. This is enough guidance. You do not need to know who you will be to take the next step. You only need to know how to meet this step with care. This humility also prepares you for unexpected transformation. Life may shape you in ways you did not choose. Illness, loss, love, aging. These forces transform identity regardless of intention. Trusting, not knowing, makes you more adaptable. When identity is flexible, change hurts less. You bend rather than break. Buddhism often speaks of no fixed self. This teaching is not meant to erase individuality. It is meant to relieve the pressure of having to define yourself permanently. You are a process, not a product. Accepting this can feel destabilizing at first, but over time, it becomes liberating. You stop trying to control who you are. You participate in becoming. Trusting transformation without a narrative also reduces the need for external validation. When you are not aiming to become something recognizable, you stop seeking applause. You act from alignment rather than image. This does not mean you withdraw from society. It means you engage without self-construction. Over time, you may notice that people experience you as more grounded. Not because you are impressive, but because you are real. Presence replaces performance. This presence is what Buddhist trust ultimately cultivates. Not a perfected self, but a responsive one. As you continue walking this path, you realize something quietly profound. You do not need to know who you will become to trust the process. The process itself is alive. It is shaping you moment by moment. You are becoming through how you listen, how you respond, how you care, how you stay present. The future self does not need to be imagined. It will arrive through living. And in releasing the demand to know who you are becoming, you discover a deeper humility, one that allows life to work on you without interference. Trust matures here. It is no longer about arriving. It is about allowing. You keep walking, not toward a version of yourself, but with yourself, exactly as you are, open to whatever form the path takes next. As the need to define who you are becoming begins to loosen, another misunderstanding quietly fades with it. The idea that trust is something you either possess or lack, that some people are naturally trusting and others are not. That trust is a trait, fixed early, shaped by personality or history. When this belief dissolves, something more honest appears. Trust is not who you are. It is what you choose again and again. Most people speak about trust as if it were a permanent quality. They say things like, "I'm just not a trusting person," or "I lost my ability to trust." These statements feel true because disappointment leaves deep marks. When trust is broken, it feels personal. It feels like something inside you has been damaged. But Buddhism does not frame trust this way. It does not see trust as a fragile object you lose once and never recover. It sees trust as a practice, a behavior, a moment-by-moment decision. Trust as an ongoing choice changes how you relate to your past. Instead of seeing past betrayals or failures as proof that trust is dangerous, you begin to see them as moments where trust was tested, not destroyed. Disappointment does not end the possibility of trust. It becomes the place where trust must be practiced more deliberately. This is important because many people stop trusting, not because trust is impossible, but because disappointment feels unbearable. They protect themselves by withdrawing, by closing, by deciding never again. This protection feels wise, but over time it hardens into isolation. Buddhist trust does not ask you to forget disappointment. It asks you to include it in your practice. You remember what hurt, you learn from it, and then you choose how to meet the next moment anyway. This choice is not abstract. It shows up in small ways. Do you stay present after being let down, or do you retreat? Do you speak honestly after being misunderstood, or do you shut down? Do you continue practicing patience after effort goes unseen, or do you give up? Each of these moments is an opportunity to practice trust. Trust is not a feeling you wait for. Feelings come and go. Trust is an action you take even when feelings are mixed. You may feel wary and still choose openness. You may feel tired and still choose to show up. This is why trust cannot be reduced to personality. It does not depend on temperament. It depends on intention. Buddhist practice emphasizes repetition. You return to the breath again and again. You return to awareness again and again. Trust works the same way. You return to it after every disappointment, not because you feel confident, but because you value engagement over withdrawal. Disappointment is inevitable. People will fail you. You will fail yourself. Plans will fall apart. If trust were a personality trait, it would be irrational to trust again after these experiences. But trust as practice understands something deeper. Avoiding trust does not protect you from pain. It simply replaces pain with numbness. Choosing trust does not mean ignoring reality. It means acknowledging reality fully and still deciding how you want to live. You do not trust blindly. You trust consciously. This conscious trust is grounded in discernment. You learn where trust is appropriate and where boundaries are needed. Trust is not indiscriminate openness. It is a skillful response to conditions. Buddhist trust grows alongside wisdom. Wisdom helps you see patterns. It helps you recognize when trust has been misplaced and when it is being withheld out of fear rather than clarity. This discernment develops over time. Trust as practice also changes how you view setbacks. When something goes wrong, you no longer interpret it as proof that trust was foolish. You see it as part of the learning process. You adjust without condemning yourself. This reduces shame. Shame often follows disappointment because people believe they should have known better. Trust as practice removes this self-blame. You did what you could with what you knew. Now you choose how to proceed. Another misunderstanding is that trust should feel easy if it is right. Buddhism challenges this. Trust often feels difficult, especially after disappointment. Ease is not the measure of trust. Commitment is. Commitment here does not mean stubbornness. It means a willingness to keep engaging with life even when it hurts. This engagement is what keeps the heart alive. Trust as an ongoing choice also means you allow trust to fluctuate. Some days it is strong, some days it is fragile. You do not judge yourself for this. You meet each day honestly. This honesty prevents trust from becoming performative. You do not pretend to be more open than you are. You act within your capacity while gently expanding it. Buddhist teachings often emphasize beginning again. No matter how many times you wander, you return. Trust follows the same rhythm. You lose it, you find it, you lose it again. Each return strengthens the practice. This perspective is liberating. You stop measuring yourself by how trusting you feel. You measure yourself by how willing you are to return after closing. Trusting again after disappointment does not erase memory. You remember what happened. Memory informs wisdom. But memory does not dictate your future. There is also compassion here. You recognize that distrust often arises from hurt. When you choose trust again, you are not betraying yourself. You are caring for the part of you that still wants connection. Trust as practice also applies to trusting yourself. After making mistakes, many people stop trusting their judgment. They become overly cautious or indecisive. Buddhism encourages a different response. You learn from mistakes without losing confidence in your ability to learn. Self-trust is rebuilt through action. You make small choices. You observe the outcome. You adjust. Over time, confidence returns not because you avoid mistakes, but because you know you can respond to them. Trust as an ongoing choice also reframes healing. Healing is not the elimination of mistrust. It is the capacity to notice mistrust and choose engagement anyway. This is especially important in long-term practice. There will be periods when trust feels thin, when doubt dominates, when enthusiasm fades. Trust as a trait would fail here. Trust as practice continues. Buddhism does not expect constant faith. It expects honesty. You admit when trust is hard. You stay present with that difficulty. And when possible, you choose one small act of trust. This act might be as simple as continuing to practice, continuing to listen, continuing to breathe. Trust does not always look dramatic. Often it looks like persistence. Over time, this persistence reshapes identity. You may begin to see yourself as someone who returns rather than someone who never falls. This identity is more resilient. Trust as practice also reduces cynicism. Cynicism often arises after repeated disappointment. It feels intelligent. It feels protective, but it isolates. Practicing trust keeps cynicism from becoming your default. This does not make you naive, it makes you flexible. You respond rather than withdraw. Buddhist trust also recognizes that some disappointments take time to integrate. You do not rush yourself to trust again. You allow healing to unfold. Practice respects pacing. Trusting again does not mean reopening old wounds recklessly. It means staying open to the possibility of connection while honoring what you have learned. This balance is subtle. It requires attention. But attention is something you have been cultivating all along. Trust as an ongoing choice also means accepting that there will be days you choose not to trust. Days you need rest. Days you need distance. These choices are part of the practice too. What matters is that you do not turn a moment of withdrawal into a permanent identity. You do not say, "This is just who I am now." You leave the door open. Leaving the door open is an act of trust, even if you do not walk through it immediately. As you continue on this path, trust becomes less about certainty and more about courage. Courage to stay engaged, courage to return, courage to choose openness again. You stop asking, "Do I have trust?" and start asking, "How will I practice trust today?" This question is empowering because it gives you agency. Trust is no longer something that happens to you, it is something you participate in. And in that participation, trust grows quietly, not as a fixed trait, but as a living practice that adapts, deepens, and renews itself with every choice you make to stay open after disappointment. You keep walking, not because trust is easy, but because choosing it again and again is how life continues to unfold. As trust becomes something you practice instead of something you hope to feel, another temptation quietly appears. The temptation to use trust as a shield, to use spiritual language to stay composed, to stay calm at all costs, to rise above pain instead of walking through it. This is where many sincere seekers get lost without realizing it. They are still walking, but they are walking away from parts of themselves. Spiritual bypass happens when trust is misunderstood as emotional avoidance, when calm becomes compulsory, when positivity becomes a rule, when grief, anger, or doubt are treated as failures of faith instead of honest responses to life. It looks peaceful from the outside, but inside, something is being silenced. True trust does not demand emotional perfection. It does not ask you to transcend pain before you have felt it. It does not rush you into acceptance before anger has spoken or grief has moved. Buddhism does not teach you to escape difficult emotions. It teaches you to meet them without turning away. Walking without spiritual bypass means allowing the full range of human experience to arise while staying present, not fixing emotions, not spiritualizing them, not judging them, simply letting them be known. This is harder than forcing calm. Forced calm is tidy, it earns approval, it feels controlled, but it is brittle, it cracks under real pressure. Real trust is messy, it breathes, it shakes, it allows tears, rage, confusion, and silence to move through without labeling them as problems. Many people turn to spirituality because life hurts. This is natural. But when spirituality becomes a way to avoid pain, instead of a way to relate to it, suffering deepens. Pain that is not allowed does not disappear. It goes underground. It leaks out as numbness, irritability, fatigue, or quiet despair. Buddhist practice is grounded in honesty. The first truth it offers is not peace, it is suffering, not as a failure, but as a fact. Trust begins by acknowledging this fact without trying to improve it. Walking without bypass means you stop asking emotions to justify themselves. You do not ask grief to hurry. You do not ask anger to soften before it is understood. You do not ask doubt to disappear so you can feel spiritual again. Instead, you stay, you feel, you listen. Grief is one of the most bypassed emotions. People rush to acceptance. They say everything happens for a reason. They look for lessons too quickly, but grief needs space. It needs time. It needs to be felt in the body. Buddhism does not offer shortcuts here. It allows grief to unfold at its own pace. Trusting life does not mean trusting that loss is good. It means trusting that you can stay present with loss without being destroyed by it. This is a profound difference. Anger is another emotion often rejected in spiritual spaces. It is labeled unskillful, egoic, or negative. But anger carries information. It points to violated boundaries, unmet needs, or injustice. When anger is bypassed, those signals are ignored. When anger is met with awareness, it becomes clarity rather than harm. Buddhist teachings do not ask you to act out of anger. They ask you to understand it, to feel it fully without letting it dictate behavior. This requires trust. Trust that awareness is strong enough to hold intensity. Doubt is also frequently bypassed. People believe trust should eliminate doubt. When doubt arises, they assume something is wrong. But doubt is not the enemy of trust. It is part of inquiry. It keeps you honest. It prevents blind belief. Walking without bypass means allowing doubt to coexist with practice. You do not need certainty to continue. You need sincerity. Forcing positivity is one of the most subtle forms of bypass. You tell yourself to focus on the good, to stay grateful, to reframe everything. Gratitude is powerful, but when it is used to suppress pain, it becomes toxic. It invalidates real experience. True trust does not require you to feel good about everything. It allows you to feel what you feel and still stay engaged with life. This engagement is what distinguishes trust from avoidance. You do not retreat into spiritual ideas to escape discomfort. You bring awareness into discomfort. Buddhism emphasizes mindfulness not as relaxation, but as clear seeing. Clear seeing includes unpleasant sensations, difficult emotions, and uncomfortable truths. Trust is the willingness to see clearly without flinching. Walking without bypass also means letting emotions change naturally. You do not cling to them. You do not push them away. You allow movement. Emotions are processes, not states to manage. When emotions are allowed, they complete themselves. When they are resisted, they linger. Many people fear that allowing grief or anger will overwhelm them. This fear is understandable, but bypass does not prevent overwhelm. It delays it. Trusting presence teaches you that emotions rise and fall when they are met with awareness. This does not mean you expose yourself to intensity without support. Buddhism values wise containment. You ground yourself, you return to the breath, you seek community when needed. Trust does not mean isolation. Walking without bypass also reveals hidden expectations. Expectations that trust should make you serene, that practice should make you unshakable. These expectations create shame when reality does not match the image. Shame is a sign of bypass. It tells you that some part of you is unacceptable. Buddhism rejects this. No part of experience is excluded from awareness. Trust is inclusive. It includes sorrow and joy, strength and fragility, certainty and doubt. This inclusivity creates resilience. You stop fearing emotions because you stop treating them as threats. They become visitors rather than invaders. Another aspect of bypass is spiritual comparison. You look at others who seem calm and assume you are failing. This comparison feeds self-rejection. Trust asks you to stay with your own experience, not someone else's image. Walking without bypass also changes how you speak. You stop using spiritual language to minimize pain. You speak plainly, honestly. You say, "This hurts." You say, "I am angry." You say, "I do not know." This honesty deepens connection. Buddhist ethics support this honesty. Right speech is not about sounding enlightened, it is about being truthful and kind. True trust also allows joy without guilt. When you stop bypassing pain, you also stop suppressing pleasure. You feel more fully across the spectrum. Walking without bypass means trusting that you do not need to curate your inner life. You do not need to edit yourself to be worthy. This trust is embodied. It is felt in the willingness to breathe through discomfort, to stay present when emotions peak, to let the nervous system learn that intensity is survivable. Over time, emotions lose their grip, not because you mastered them, but because you stopped fighting them. Spiritual bypass often comes from a desire to be good, evolved, or healed. Trust lets go of this performance. You stop trying to arrive, you stay where you are. Buddhism teaches that liberation is not found by rejecting parts of experience, but by understanding them. Understanding requires contact. Walking without bypass also honors trauma. Trauma cannot be bypassed. It must be met slowly, safely, with care. Trust does not force healing, it allows it. This practice requires patience. There is no schedule for emotional truth. Trust respects timing. When you allow grief, anger, and doubt, you also allow wisdom to deepen. These emotions teach. They refine compassion. They sharpen clarity. Trust becomes grounded here, not in calmness, but in capacity. Capacity to feel. Capacity to stay. Capacity to respond wisely. You stop using spirituality as a way out. You use it as a way in. This does not make life easier, it makes it real. Walking without bypass means trusting that truth, even when painful, is more healing than comfort built on denial. As you continue walking this way, something steadies. You no longer fear your inner world. You no longer rush to fix it. You let it move. This is true trust. Not trust that everything will be fine, but trust that you can meet what is not fine without abandoning yourself. And in that trust, something profound happens. You become more alive, more honest, more compassionate. You are no longer walking above your life. You are walking inside it, step by step, emotion by emotion, without bypass, without pretending, fully present. You've seen it now. Trust was never about certainty, signs, or safety nets. It was never about having the answers, fixing yourself, or arriving at some perfected version of who you should be. Trust was always quieter than that. It was learning to walk while unfinished, letting mistakes teach instead of punish, acting without guarantees, staying when discomfort asks you to run, listening to the body when the mind argues, allowing doubt, grief, and confusion to be part of wisdom, not proof of failure, moving forward even when nothing confirms you are doing it right. Trust is not knowing where the path leads. Trust is choosing the next step anyway. If something in you feels steadier right now, even without answers, that's not clarity arriving. That's trust beginning to live in your body. If this message met you where you are, write "I'm still walking" in the comments. It tells me you didn't just listen, you stayed. And if you want more teachings like this, grounded, honest, and free from false comfort, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. The path continues, and you don't have to walk it alone. Until next time.